live stream as we follow two major hurricanes that continue to swirl in the Atlantic. Idalia, a major hurricane. Franklin, not major, but still Category 2, bringing intense rainfall into Atlantic Canada. Thanks so much for joining us. We are going to be your source over the next few hours to track these two storms, especially all of the action that's heading into Florida with Idalia. This could be an unprecedented event. We do have storm hunter Mark Robinson driving in the car right now. He is headed towards Perry, Florida. That's just about an hour to the southeast of Tallahassee, so we'll be checking in with him in just a second. And then Nathan Coleman also joining us from Atlantic Canada, a place that has been so saturated all summer long, and now we see the remnants of a Hurricane Franklin moving into this region. So we have some great stories coming up, and I also have meteorologist Rachel Modestino. She'll be joining me as well to pinpoint exactly what is happening in Florida, how much rain is falling, how strong the storm surge is, the tornado warnings that will also move their way onto the coast. It's a scary scene, and so many of the officials in Florida, they are just saying one word at this point: leave. You need to get out right now. So let's go to storm hunter Mark Robinson. Mark, this has been a very intense hurricane to forecast, an unprecedented event heading towards the Big Bend area of Florida. And I just want to explain that to the audience because we have a lot of a Canadian audience as well. The Big Bend area is essentially where the panhandle starts to meet the peninsula of Florida. And it is very rare for a hurricane to reach major status and then head towards this region. And this is likely to continue to strengthen. So Mark, walk me through this. What's going on in your mind right now as you drive towards a zone that is going to see some very intense weather?
Yeah, Rachel, right now we're just, the concentration is to get over to Perry. We started in Gainesville this morning. And what was interesting, in Gainesville, we had very little rain and wind, because we were between those bands. But it does look like the main section, the strongest part of the storm, may come on shore a little closer to Tallahassee. So a lot of Canadians, may know either Gainesville or Tallahassee. And the storm looks to be coming in sort of between those two spots. Keep in mind that with hurricanes, the entire swath of wind is not running at those Cat 4 strength. It's that inner core right around the eye itself that's running at those very, very strong, very high wind speeds. And so that's one of the spots that we're going to get to show you what's going on. There is a blessing in this one though, or there is sort of a raining in the clouds. The Bend area is very sparsely populated, so there's not that many major cities in the way. It's not like this is going into Tampa, which would have been sort of worst case scenario, but definitely one of those issues that we're getting a little bit lucky in that it's going into a much more sparsely populated.
All right, Mark, it looks like we're losing your connection a little bit, but throughout this live stream, I know we're going to get you back and we're going to talk about what you're seeing and some of the big concerns with this. I just want to let everyone know 46 counties in Florida are under a state of emergency. Florida has mobilized over 1,000 National Guard members who have 2,400 high water vehicles, 12 aircraft at their disposal for all of the rescue and the recovery efforts, while about 30,000 utility workers are reportedly ready to just get to the scene and help with to bring through Florida. Now, we're going to get back to Florida in a second, but now I want to take you to Nathan Coleman. Nate, let us know exactly where you are in Atlantic Canada and the rainfall that you are expected to see today.
Yes, Rachel, I'm out here, of course, not dealing with any type of tropical force or hurricane force winds. The wind are not an issue, it's the rain. We're drawing in that tropical moisture with a different system. So some places could see upwards of 80 millimeters of rain along the Atlantic coastline of Nova Scotia. I'm right here in Halifax, where the ground is completely saturated from the rainy summer we have had thus far, with some localized areas receiving 700 to 800 millimeters since June. Normally, last year they got about 200 to 300, so that gives you an idea of how much over the top we are. The water levels are running high, so any additional rainfall could be a danger for flooding. You want to make sure you clear those storm drains out here, and be cautious as you travel along the road. There's a rainfall warning that mentions, we've had so many incidences of the road, the shoulder of the road being washed out, and that can be quite dangerous. If you see a road covered in water, you want to turn around. And I also wanted to show you an item I picked up. I've never had to do this until this rainy summer. This is it's called a Rescue Me, and it's a part of a keychain that'll help you break the windshield from the interior if you get trapped in water. So this is one of those things that people around here are starting to think about when we may not have before, but there's just been so many flash flooding events here. It's something to keep in mind.
Nate, I think that really puts it into perspective, you know, the different mindset that people have had to take in order to be safe in this type of weather. You know, Halifax has seen 2 major flooding events over this summer, and getting this rainfall with Franklin isn't something that you need in your backyard right now. Nate, we're going to continue to check in with you throughout the live stream to see the difference in the change in the weather as we go throughout this morning and as Franklin continues to move closer. But right now, meteorologist Rachel Modestino is with us. And Rachel, you know, we're still in August. September is when we see the peak really of hurricane season and the most action and the warmer waters. But this is really an unprecedented event, and there is just so much to cover and so many different weather angles to get to when it comes to these 2 hurricanes.
Yeah, I just wanted to show the 2 hurricanes that we are talking about is Idalia in the Gulf of Mexico that is imminently about to make landfall in Florida, and Franklin that is out over the Atlantic Ocean. This is what they looked like yesterday, and this is what they look like this morning. Now, I want to point out 2 differences. Franklin, that eye wall is so big, and that's showing us that it's dissipating. When that happens, our hurricanes really tends to wind out, so they expand outwards. So Franklin is now at a Category 2 strength. It is not expected to make landfall in the Maritimes, but what it is doing is pulling in that moisture into the Maritimes, and that's where we could see significant rainfall throughout today. But when we look at Idalia, we see the eye is so small. It's like a pinpoint. And currently it is going under an eye wall cycle. So what that means is the outer bands of this storm are overtaking the eye wall. And usually if this storm had more time over the water, it would actually strengthen. But because we're almost making landfall, we are expecting this to make landfall around Category 3 strength. So it was a 4. It looks like the winds have diminished slightly because of that eye wall replacement cycle. Still will be a high-end Cat 3, and that does not take away from the catastrophic damage that we could possibly be seeing, honestly, within the coming minutes.
Absolutely. Now, I have so many questions when it comes to this, but we're going to get to Mark Robinson just to show you another look at the ground. Rachel is going to be with us throughout this live stream, sort of explaining these really interesting weather elements when it comes to this huge hurricane that is making landfall in the Big Bend region of Florida this morning. Mark, let's go to you right now. I just want to know, why did you pick Perry, Florida as sort of your target to be at today? Just, is it the storm surge? Is it the winds? What's the advantage of being in Perry?
Well, I mean, you know, I wanted to show, you know, the strength of the storm. It actually is well away from the storm surge. This is one of these ones where you cannot be close to the storm surge because it's down in the swampy areas, and those areas are to get hit with so much surge. It would be extraordinarily dangerous. So this gives a balance between the people impacted and how strong the storm and like the winds that we're going to see. Because, you know, I want to emphasize that these storms are incredible to watch, but it does have an impact on people. And that is and this is one of these areas that is going to get hit with you know, these are the people that are going to be impacted by this storm.
Now, we saw some pretty incredible images yesterday as you were touring the Tampa area, setting up an aqua wall around the hospital. And this aqua wall will be able to sustain about 15 feet of storm surge. It is just incredible the lengths that people have to go through in order to protect these buildings, protect themselves. So much of the messaging from the government was just begging people to leave the area. So, Mark, let's talk about this hurricane. You know, Florida is no stranger to hurricanes. We saw Ian take a similar path, not exactly the same as Idalia, but similar. And you know, so many regions down in Cuba feel like they have just recovered from Ian, and now Idalia came through. Is this going to be a similar story in Florida, where some of these communities feel like they've just recovered, and now this major hurricane is about to make landfall just within hours or minutes?
I think it's possible that it, you know, some areas, you know, are going to get hit again. We were talking with some locals saying, oh, you know, again. But at the same time, a lot of people that live in Florida, this is hurricane what they're used to. This happens every single year, but one of the things I did see was Fort Myers Beach, one of the places that was hit so hard by Ian, was flooding well ahead of the storm. Not a lot of wind there, but that flooding was definitely putting people on edge, because it was like, oh no, here we go again. If this makes even a slight right-hand turn, I think lucky for them, it did closer to Tallahassee. And as I was saying earlier, this is an area not that populated, but again, we still do have communities that we're getting into right now. Literally, this is the community of Perry.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for that update. We're going to check back in with Mark Robinson in just a few minutes. Just want to give you an update right now. Idalia's maximum sustained winds are now estimated to be about 205 kilometers an hour. That's just an update that's coming in from our meteorologist, Michael Carter. Of course, there's some higher gusts associated with this. Now, this change in the wind speed does not diminish the threat for catastrophic storm surge and damaging winds. Rachel, let's talk a little bit about the storm surge, because that is really going to be the scariest and possibly the most deadliest part of this storm, especially for that Big Bend region in Florida. And remember, that is the part of Florida where the panhandle sort of meets the peninsula, right in that curve, call it like a little elbow, let's say. When we talk about storm surge, this literally is the waters from the Gulf of Mexico moving on land. So we're not talking about water that's going to cover your ankles. We're talking water that could be 2 to 3 times the height of us.
Yes, exactly. And what that is caused by is the very gusty winds that are blowing out of the storm, but also the pressure in the eye. Remember, hurricanes are low pressure systems, so we have air that's descending down onto the water and pushing it outward. So we have a downward motion and a horizontal motion. And that's what causes the most destruction, is when we get that eye coming onto shore. It's pushing all of that water. And that is the biggest concern from the National Hurricane Center, is the storm surge. This is the forecast. Rachel, we're talking about 3 to 5 meters where this is going to make landfall. And that's that Grand Bend region that you were talking about, wherever you see those numbers. Big Bend, yes.
And when we look at something like this, it is just incredible to even visualize and think about how intense this will look as it starts to come on shore. We do have multiple storm surge forecasts, warnings, evacuation orders in place. There are 46 counties in Florida that are under a state of emergency. Now, Rachel, one thing that we were talking about just before we joined Mark was the term landfall. For someone who's just tuning in, we're talking about hurricanes. How do we exactly determine landfall? What needs to happen? Because Idalia has not made landfall yet. What needs to happen for us to say, okay, this storm made landfall exactly here?
Yeah, and that's what's confusing, is because we're already seeing the flooding around 2 meters in the Fort Myers area, and we're already seeing very gusty winds. But what makes actual landfall is when the eye of the storm crosses over into land. It's a little bit difficult. You might think that this is the eye, but it's actually this little pinpoint here. Like I mentioned, it is a small eye. It's undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle. So that is a little bit of good news, is that it diminished slightly as it made its way towards land. But once that eye wall, the center of it, makes its way onto land, then we can officially say that Idalia made landfall in Florida.
Okay, and now speaking of making landfall, let's go back to Mark Robinson. Mark, actually, we're going to go to Chris Murphy right now. So Chris Murphy is in our studio. And Chris, you have worked here at the Weather Network for quite a long time. Yes. Forever, let's call it.
Okay.
You have seen many hurricanes make landfall. And it really is such an intense moment of time as we're tracking this huge storm. It's coming on land. We officially see the landfall. And that could happen really within minutes to an hour here with Idalia.
Yeah, and when it comes to these storms, also it coincides with the tides, because the storm coming in during low tide versus high tide also has a big can have a big difference in that. And tides are really what it is the result of gravitational pull, and the moon is the primary. The moon's gravitational pull is the primary reason for our tides. And now that we're in a super moon, well, that just puts everything into overdrive. drive when we're talking about the extremes between low tide and high tide. So the normal surge would alone is already high. If this occurs during high tide, well, then that can get even worse. This, by the way, just showing you a visual demonstration of what a storm surge can do. Now, my understanding reading around, looks like that over the Big Bend area, that low tide was this morning and high tide is coming through about midday. But as Mark Robinson has been talking to, you can't get down there. It's a very swampy area, extraordinarily dangerous. But regardless of the tides, this is one to take serious. But that's just something else. It is a super moon. This is a poorly timed storm to have a hurricane during a full moon or a new moon, but even worse during a supermoon.
Absolutely. And that's why there are so many curfews, for example, in places like Savannah. We are looking at people evacuating Florida. Of course, this is not just a choice. This should be an absolute must in terms of evacuation from some of these areas. But the issue is they could be evacuating to areas like Georgia or South Carolina, who could also see such intense flooding, wind damage, power outages with this storm. So looks like Mark Robinson, looks like we just lost his feed actually. We're going to try and check back in with him. But Rachel, let's go over some of the U.S. major hurricane landfalls when we look at Florida. And I'm noticing something really interesting here. Within that Big Bend region, we see quite a gap. So when we talk about this being an unprecedented event, these regions like Perry, like Tallahassee, they haven't seen this before.
No, this is not something we've ever seen in recorded history. And Florida is known to get some big hurricanes. You can see here, category 3, 4, and 5. What might be ringing a bell is Ian. That happened just last year, but the track was south of Sarasota. This one's more so to the north, but this is going to be something that we've never experienced before, major hurricane landfall in the Big Bend region. Luckily, like Mark was mentioning, it is outside of very highly populated areas.
Yeah.
It is more so marshlands up in that region, forested area in and around Tallahassee, but that's going to be causing some issues with the winds, any sort of wind damage, power outages, very likely.
Now, what you're looking at here is a satellite, a space view. This was on August 29th, so just yesterday, of Idalia, and you can just see the size of this storm. And Rachel, something so interesting with this storm is, you know, anytime we see a storm trapped in the Gulf, I often think back to Harvey and the devastation that it had in Texas, right? That storm trapped in the Gulf, it just intensified so fast, so much rainfall, so much intense flooding. This storm didn't really have a lot of time to gain its big structure, but still, when you look at the size of it, it's a monster.
It is a monster. I mean, we got to peak category 4 strength, and it's all because of, it really had essentially rocket fuel. When you look at how warm the waters were in the Gulf of Mexico, we are talking about 30, 31 degrees incredible. As it made its approach to Florida. What we need for a tropical storm development is only 27.
Yeah.
So it had ample fuel to get there, even though it didn't have a lot of time over water. And that's what also causes that rapid intensification and can take many folks by surprise.
Now, when we talk about water temperatures, Franklin is actually moving into cooler waters. And we were showing you that image before of the wind field sort of really spreading out, the storm continuing to dissipate. Franklin is still a category 2 hurricane, and we know that some of this rainfall will be moving into Atlantic Canada. So we're joining Nathan Coleman right now. Nate, let us know exactly where you are in Atlantic Canada and what kind of rainfall you're expecting to see today.
Well, I'm out here in Halifax, which is under a rainfall warning, Rachel, and that means anywhere from 50 to 80 millimeters is possible. That's along the Atlantic coastline. We're very thankful Franklin is staying well to our south. We just dealt with an F storm last year, Fiona, which wreaked havoc on the region. So we'll take the reduced winds out here, but still, it's been a very wet summer here, so the ground is quite saturated, and as you can see, we have leaves on the ground. We're starting to make that transition into fall, so you want to make sure you clean up those leaves on your property, get them away from any storm drains, because we do have that risk of localized flooding. There could be flash flooding with this. Of course, there's going to be some thunderstorms, so anytime you have that threat with the tropical moisture, as we've learned, that can cause some training thunderstorms, and they dip into that moisture, and those amounts could shoot up quickly. So you want to be cautious as you head out here today. Right now in a bit of a dry slot here in Halifax, but those rains will continue throughout the day and into the evening hours.
No shortage of weather stories to tackle. Nathan Coleman, thank you for being our eyes on the ground as we watch Franklin move through Atlantic Canada with tropical moisture associated with that. Now, Rachel, I still got so many questions for you. We're going to get back to Rachel in a second, but right now, I just want to show you a look at yesterday. Our reporter Victoria put this together, just showing some of the preparation and the urgency to get people out of Florida as Idalia races towards the Big Bend.
Hurricane preparation is underway in the state of Florida as Idalia approaches the Gulf Coast. Treasure Island City Hall has wrapped computers and electronics in plastic. Locals brace themselves by setting up sandbags. Meanwhile, Tampa General Hospital is defending itself from significant storm surge with an aqua fence.
Because they're so close to the water, you're going to see the water over there. This could be an area that's hit hard with surge. Take a look at this. So this holds back the water. So this can handle up to 15 feet of surge. It's bolted into the ground down there.
In a press conference, the mayor of Cedar Key, Florida, said that over 100 residents are not heeding to evacuation orders.
This storm is worse than we've ever seen.
I haven't seen that many people getting ready around here yet.
That sense of panic, I think, is not there. People seems to be going about.
By Tuesday afternoon, the storm's outer band arrived in southwest Florida.
This is the beginning of the hurricane. This is the first rain band. I'm in Tampa.
Bringing rough surf and strong wind gusts.
It is bucketing rain in this first rain band.
A foreshadow of what is to come as Hurricane Idalia is set to hit Wednesday morning.
Well, that was quick. Now I got to get this moved, and I left the keys in my Jeep.
Talk about Hurricane Idalia now. Rachel, let's first go over the different categories just so we can put into perspective how strong and how much structure this hurricane has right now.
Well, as you can see, the categories of a hurricane are measured by how gusty the winds are. And just 12 hours ago, Idalia was a Category 1. So we're talking about 120 to 150 kilometer per hour winds. However, in 12 hours, it rapidly intensified into a Category 4, and that's where we're going to be experiencing catastrophic wind damage. However, it has diminished, so we're sitting at Category 3, but a high-end Category 3, so we're kind of on the teeter. But 200 kilometer per hour winds is expected. Devastating damage caused by just winds alone, not taking into account the storm surge, the flooding rains, and everything else that comes with a hurricane.
Absolutely. Now, Rachel, let's take a look at the potential for tornadoes, because that's just a small other portion of this weather story. There have been so many tornado watches and warnings within Florida. You know, what a scary scene if you decided to stay, or maybe you were in an area that wasn't under an evacuation order, and now you see a tornado coming towards your neighborhood.
Yeah, imagine waking up at 7 in the morning to what you think is your alarm, but it's actually a tornado warning on your cell phone.
Yeah.
But these outer bands of Idalia are no joke. These ones that I'm talking about are right here. If my pink is going to allow it, there we go. So what is in that is embedded thunderstorms, and those thunderstorms are very strong. And they have their own dynamics associated with them. So with that, we are expecting to see tornadoes not only across Florida, but also Georgia and possibly the Carolinas as this makes its way towards the north.
Now, I'm just looking at this radar. We are looking at the eye of the storm just getting so incredibly close to the coast right now.
Yeah, it is. We can actually measure it if I could find my measuring tool, but we are really kilometers,
wow.
6 maybe kilometers away. So in the coming moments, we will get a graphic up to say that it has made landfall. But yeah, that is devastatingly close. The good news is if you're on the east side, you're not really experiencing a lot of that heavy rainfall. But those of us on the west, that heavy band of rainfall is going to continue. And then watch as this loops around, that could really have another surge onto shore because it is rotating in this direction. So yeah, we are moments away from Idalia officially making landfall as a major hurricane in the Big Bend area.
Now, it's interesting because when you look at the eye wall like this, right around the structure of the eye wall, it is devastating, horrendous winds. But if you're actually standing right in the center of it, it is very calm, and it's quite an eerie scene. I know I've seen our storm hunters do this before, where they position themselves to be right in the center of that eye wall, and it's actually like there's almost no weather happening there.
Yeah, there is no weather happening there. It's actually clear skies. If the sun was up, I'm sure you would see the sun, and it's all because of the low pressure system and the way that the hurricane orients itself. So it's a calm within the storm almost, but around the eye, that's where we have the strongest thunderstorms and often the strongest push of water onto shore as well. So although it might be a beautiful sight when you're in it,
you don't want to be in it.
You don't want to be in it. You don't want to be anywhere near it.
Absolutely. You can see that radar that we were showing, the reflectivity. It is just incredible to see all of the lightning that was associated with this too. This is bringing in just so much energy. And speaking of energy, well, the people of Florida have had to expend a lot of that. Look at some of the work that was happening yesterday. You know, this hurricane making landfall in hours, and people are at the last minute putting up this aqua fence around the hospital in order to keep people safe. This is literally bolted into the ground, and this will help the hospital withstand about 15 feet of storm surge. Storm surge can be the deadliest part of a storm. This is when the winds actually carry and sort of whip the ocean waters onto the ground. And this is when we talk about flooding that is not just up to your ankles or knees. This is flooding that could be, let's call it 15 feet into the air. It is incredible to see the power of storm surge and sort of the change in landscape that we can see over an area. Now, someone who certainly has experienced a lot of storm surge is meteorologist and storm hunter Mark Robinson. Mark, where are you right now, and what are you experiencing with this storm? It looks like you're out of the vehicle now, so give us an update on your location.
Yeah, hi, Rachel. Hopefully you can hear me. We're just sort of working on all kinds of issues because you can imagine what it is like in a hurricane. You know, normal shooting is hard enough. We are in Perry, Florida, just to the southeast of Tallahassee. And I want to take you sort of behind us. You notice the power is now out. We actually had a transformer over here exploding on us, so that it would explode. You see a big green flash and just all of a sudden sparks flying down with the wind. So definitely losing power here in Perry, and the wind is picking up as that core of the storm gets closer and closer here. The one good thing about here is we won't have to worry about the storm surge. If you're down closer to the coast, you know, you're looking at maybe as much as 16 feet of storm surge, and that is just with the small communities down there. There's no parking garages to take shelter in, which is what I usually do with these storms. That is just going to be so spectacularly dangerous that we decided, we're not going to try anything like that. We're going to stay up here in Perry and try to show you the power of this storm, this hurricane, as it's coming on shore here in Florida. But like a lot of Canadians might know the Gainesville area, they might know Tallahassee. We're sort of midway between those 2 points. And this looks like, the core of the storm may make its way through this area. And, as I said, we've already started losing power. And, the core of that storm is not on shore yet.
Mark, let's talk a little bit about how this is such an unprecedented event. It is first rare to see a storm rapidly intensify like Idalia has, and now move towards the Big Bend region. The Big Bend region of Florida hasn't seen a hurricane make landfall, especially a major hurricane make landfall. So talk a little bit about how rare this is, especially for the end of August.
Yeah, this is super rare. I mean, the one thing is Florida does tend to have a lot of its hurricanes in August. It's Canada that gets them in September as they make their way up towards where Nate Coleman is in Halifax. But this Big Bend area, I believe the last major that hit here was over 100 years ago. This is what I've heard. But right now, this area is going to be hit by this one. What often happens is the hurricanes are coming in a little bit straight across Florida, or they go over towards Mississippi. They very rarely make their way in here. Now, the one good thing about, I'm just gonna have to, there goes debris flying behind me right there. So I'm gonna have to grab my helmet in a second, just because I want to be as safe as possible. But this Big Bend area very rarely sees these hurricanes, and yet here it is.
this is what's going to happen today, and hopefully people that have needed to evacuate are evacuated, because this one is going to have some major impact on an area that does rarely see it.
Absolutely, and we have been seeing that storm surge moving into places like Cedar Key along the coast of Florida. Rainfall amounts that are just overwhelming. When you look down the street, it is whipping rain, creating extremely low visibility. The wind speeds extremely strong with this. So Rachel, let's talk a little bit about the wind speeds and then all of these tropical storm watches and warnings that we're going to get into too.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to be expecting to see the worst of the winds when this makes its way onto shore, really right where Mark is situated in that Perry area. This is a look at the current tropical alerts. You can see hurricane warnings extend all the way into the Carolinas as well, and that's because Idalia is expected to maybe continue its hurricane strength as it makes its way towards landfall. So looking at the winds, like I mentioned, around 200 kilometers per hour as the gustiest winds, and then that will continue to make its way towards the Carolinas as we head through Thursday. A major hurricane wind gust is what we're expecting when this makes landfall right around where Mark is, but we may have to wait for those to wrap around because like you saw, the storm itself, it's not perfect. It's a little bit sheared, so favoring one side over another. So once that does wrap around, we will continue to see that wind damage, power outages. I'm sure there has been plenty of power outages along the West Coast.
Now, when we look at this storm, so many officials in Florida, they have just urged people to leave so desperately. This could be one of the most dangerous storms that we have seen in Florida because of the damage with the winds, also the storm surge as well. And just thinking about how many people this is affecting, because so many people who would have evacuated from the Big Bend region, from the Tampa region, let's say, they would have moved up towards Georgia, and Georgia is still going to be impacted by a Category 2 likely hurricane.
Yeah, exactly. And what the models were projecting the landfall to actually be farther south. Good news that it didn't, because that's really right in the way of Tampa, very, very populated area. But if you did get a jump on those evacuations, that's exactly where you would head, is maybe north or maybe to another state like Georgia, and you'll be still feeling the effects, and we'll be seeing all of these hurricane impacts, not only where the hurricane is, but expanding outwards. Like I mentioned, those rain bands, tornadoes continuing into Thursday, the high water, and like Chris Murphy was mentioning, the high tide coinciding with that tonight with the super blue moon. A lot of these combinations are just making for a very eerie feeling around Florida right now.
Absolutely. And so many Canadians do have homes in Florida, and I was watching some interviews that Nathan Coleman was doing with people in Halifax who own homes in Florida, and all they can really do at this point is possibly text some neighbors if neighbors decided to stay. Many people did not, which was the good choice to leave, but they're basically just going to watch this storm from their doorbell camera, and they're going to hope that their home and their property stays safe. Kind of gives me some goosebumps just thinking about that.
It does give me goosebumps too. I have a great aunt who lives in Treasure Island, which is on the coast just outside of Tampa. And that also raises another issue with evacuation. Some people just can't. If you are elderly like she is, she just really could not afford to leave. So they just have to hunker down with some of these storms. And it's also an economic issue. Some people can't afford to.
Absolutely. Now we're going to go back to Mark Robinson, who is in Perry, Florida. Mark, you got your helmet on now, and I think this is just one step that you're taking to be safe, but you often get some feedback about people evacuating Florida while you are heading into Florida. So can you talk about just how you're going to be safe, strategies around putting yourself in the right position in order to tell a good weather story, to bring us the latest, to help communicate what's happening with Idalia? Your research when it comes to hurricanes, of course, is extensive, but just let us know as to where you're positioned and why you'll stay safe in this spot through the storm.
Dangerous part of the storm, one of those dangerous aspects of a hurricane is the storm surge. Because you're dealing with tremendous amounts of energy in that water as it smashes into buildings. Where we are here in Perry, we don't have to worry about the storm surge. We really do have to worry about the winds. The winds are going to be the big story in this part. Trying to get down to see the storm surge, unfortunately, just way
I chose, the team and the meteorologists, all of us at the Weather Network, we decided, this would be the best spot to document the storm and stay safe, because that's sort of the critical thing, is to stay safe, and so that we can show you what it's like to be in one of these storms. So at this point, we're just sort of underneath a fairly substantial building, which will be able to stand some of the stronger winds in this storm as it comes on shore. There will be a slight weakening as it comes in, so that is going to make it a little easier, but at the same time we can show you what it's like to be at the heart of a major hurricane as Idalia makes landfall here in Florida in the Big Bend area.
All right, Mark Robinson, thank you so much for helping us tell the story, to show us what it's looking like on the ground in Florida this morning. I want to take you into our newsroom with meteorologist Chris Murphy. Chris, let's talk a little bit about the water temperatures, because the ocean temperatures with this event, it really is adding a lot of fuel, a lot of energy to this storm. So talk about why the ocean temperatures play such a big role.
Oh, they are. That's the fuel. We've got temperatures around 30 degrees. That's why you often, as soon as a hurricane makes landfall, that it starts to dissipate in terms of its strength. It doesn't mean the threats are over. Then the threat really more becomes, from storm surge to inland flooding, as it dumps all that rain, all that moisture has been accumulating over those very warm waters. I also want to talk about Hurricane Franklin, because this is another storm here, and you can see it's a Category 2. The wind speed's 175 kilometers per hour. I just love this shot there. So there you are. There is Idalia there, just landfall pretty much imminent, and then there's there's Franklin. Now note though, some of the connection. Now this over the Maritimes, that's not Franklin, but look at some of that. It's trying to like a straw siphon in some of that moisture from Franklin, and as Franklin moves northeastwards, well, some of this rain is going to get heavier. Now already this morning we've had thunderstorms in the Annapolis Valley, Greenwood, Nova Scotia, 25 millimeters of rain like that, pouring rain in Yarmouth. We got that drizzle and fog in Halifax, and up towards the Bay of Fundy as well. We're getting into some of those bands of rain. Well, this will continue through the day. Risk of thunderstorms, at times heavy downpours. By about overnight hours, New Brunswick, you should be out of the clear. PEI drying up as well. The heaviest rain still in Cape Breton, but over towards Newfoundland, where south coastal areas and west coastal areas of Newfoundland will get significant amounts of rain. So we could be looking at some flooding rain through here, but because of the track of Franklin being so far out to sea, that the wind will not be nearly as critical of an issue as it is, say, towards Idalia. And of course, joining us here is Nathan Coleman. Now, Nathan, you and I, of course, we did Dorian together, so this is not going to be the second coming of that storm, and thankfully, it won't rival Fiona. But regardless, how are people, what's the sentiment about this particular event?
Well, I would definitely say people are happy that it is staying so far offshore, because like you mentioned, not as much wind. I just heard Mark, he's putting his helmet on. We don't need a helmet here today. And of course, we just dealt with Fiona last year, so we need a break from this, because it's been such a bad summer with forest fires and excessive amounts of rain. But now anytime you hear there's rain in the forecast with tropical moisture, people get a little nervous, because we've had several events this year where we had those training thunderstorms drawing that tropical moisture in, and then we see excess of 100 millimeters. There was that one event over 200 millimeters that caused flash flooding, and it did result in 4 deaths here. So quite unusual to have deaths as a result of a rainstorm, but that's what's happened this summer. So people being extra cautious here, taking it very slow on the roads. We know, if you see a road that does get flooded out, you don't want to drive over top of it. You don't know what's underneath there, because there have been so many washouts. So people taking things very seriously here as we continue to monitor it, but thankfully no strong winds. And you mentioned Dorian. I just wanted to give you an update. Of course, downtown Halifax, we had that crane that collapsed on a building. Everyone remembers that visual. that building was rebuilt. It's now open. There are apartments in there, and they named it the Crane. That's what everyone called it anyway.
Oh, that is it. That is an image that I will never forget, and I know you won't, Nathan. We saw that together. So I think fittingly so. Nothing like a structure with a story. All right, we'll check in with Nathan again. I just wanted to very quickly show you the wind projection here. So we could be still talking about 60, maybe locally 80 kilometer an hour winds. So I don't want to give you the idea there'll be no wind, but we're not likely to see that 90 to 100 kilometer per hour damaging threshold. And again, a lot of this has to do because of how far out to sea Franklin is. So unlike Idalia, which is a far more dangerous storm because of proximity, and certainly, all the threats from storm threat to heavy flooding rains to powerful winds, Rachel.
Absolutely. Chris, thanks so much for taking us through Franklin. I want to take you back into Idalia right now because it looks like this storm may have just made landfall. Of course, we're going to wait for the National Hurricane Center in the Atlantic to officially confirm this. But as we look at our radar right now, it looks like that eye of the storm is now officially heading overland. So, Mark, just want to give you that update as well. Of course, we'll wait for the official from the National Hurricane Center, but it looks like this storm has made landfall just minutes ago.
Yeah, I believe Rachel. If correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be close to the small town of Steinahachie, which is a little further down on the coast. We're a little bit inland. We're not having to worry much about storm surge here, but what we are having to worry about is take a look behind me. You can see, beginning to see debris coming off of these trees. The winds are gusting, so you'll get a minute or two where it goes very quiet, and then all of a sudden you'll get this blast of wind, and then all of a sudden, that's when that debris starts to fly around. We've seen that a couple of times already, and we're almost in a little bit right now, but I do expect the winds to sort of jump up. And what often happens with these hurricanes is, lulls that happen, and this one hits. And then there's a little bit of time and the next one hits. And as you get closer and closer to the core of the storm, those lulls begin to disappear, and all you get is that just constant wind blast. And there you go. The winds are once again beginning to pick up. And I'm looking, I'm looking this way beneath our little structure where we're hiding out in Perry, and I can see blasting around. Now we're covered in that direction a little bit by trees, so we're relatively
there and just showing you that look at the eye wall. It looks like it's in the Big Bend WMA, which is the wildlife management area. Of course, we're going to wait for that official confirmation. But Rachel, this also just coming into our newsroom, there are about 116,000 people in Florida right now that are without power. Many of them are within that Big Bend region. And if you're just tuning in and you're not familiar with the geography of Florida, the Big Bend region is sort of where the Panhandle meets the peninsula. So right across that big, literally it looks like a bend, sort of like an elbow shape. That is exactly where this storm is making its largest impact right now. But Rachel, we know the impact doesn't stop there. This is where the storm surge could be the most dramatic. But as this storm continues to move further to the north into places like Georgia, into the Carolinas, we're talking devastating rainfall, flooding situation. Tornadoes have been a huge talk this morning right across the state of Florida too.
Yeah, it's really all the impacts you can think of with a major hurricane like this one. I want to also point out, like you mentioned, the impacts are far-reaching. Have a look. Port Charlotte, Tampa saw maximum wind gusts of 93 kilometers per hour, and more is yet to come as this makes its way onto shore. I also wanted to point out on the radar itself, I'm anticipating that really the worst is yet to come. As it's this is the loop of the last 30 minutes. I'm just going to do the last hour. You can really see the reds and the oranges. That's indicating the very heavy rain, the strongest bands of thunderstorms, and that's still offshore. So like Mark was mentioning, we are going to be seeing the bands of rain continue to sweep pretty much the entire state of Florida, also pushing into Georgia and South Carolina. But it does look like as it makes its way onto landfall, the most intense band around the eye wall itself could be bringing some of the worst conditions yet.
Absolutely. And you know, Florida is extremely prepared for this. They have over 1,000 members of the National Guard ready to respond with water vehicles, helicopters. There are tons of people who are ready to restore power. So Florida, of course, is no stranger to hurricanes. We have seen lots of major hurricanes make landfall in Florida. You know, we think back to Ian and the devastation that Ian caused, taking not the same track, it was further to the south, but similar, you know, impacting so many of these people who live in Florida. And now we're watching this track as this hurricane making landfall this morning. We can look at scenes like this from Ian, and I'm sure people who live in Florida after they experienced Ian, they may have considered moving after that one. That was just such an intense storm to live through.
Yeah, it really was. And that impacted as, I believe, a category 5, if not 4. So you're looking at those catastrophic wind gusts. In Idalia, it has diminished. So still looking at about 200 kilometer per hour winds. But I'm looking at Mark that's setting up here that we're going to be throwing to, and have a look at how gusty the winds are. We're going to expect conditions to really deteriorate in the coming moments for Perry.
Yeah, Mark, talk a little bit about what the conditions are like right now. We can just, you know, we started this live stream 44 minutes ago, and the winds from the start till now, you can really see the power of this storm coming at you.
Oh yeah, I mean, every single time, you know, we're off air for a couple of minutes, I, you know, run in, get a little bit of shelter, and then it changes. Like, it's kind of amazing how fast things are ramping up. We actually saw lightning a little while ago, and that does tell me how strong the storm is. It's rare in the eye wall, but you will once in a while see lightning. This one producing lightning already knocked the power out to here. So my fingers are crossed that we can keep a signal for you as this begins to come in. I would guess that as it gets worse and worse, we are going to get to the point where you may not be able to hear from us. We're going to be okay. We're going to be fine here. But you know that if we do lose signal, you know, we'll get back and get a hold of you as soon as we can. But I want to take you back here. You can sort of look into the distance and you can see the palm trees already beginning to really get pushed over. Palm trees are kind of amazing. The fronds rip off in the slightest winds, but the stick, the main part of the palm, will actually stay. It's a bit of an evolution for withstanding hurricanes. It's when you bring down trees like the oaks and, you know, maples from way up north and bring them down here, they don't do so well in hurricanes, and those are often the ones that you find on trees, on houses, and of course that are very dangerous. And you can, I'm trying to talk a little bit so that you can see the change, how fast we get these changes. Yeah, we can start to see leaves flying through the air. So far, you know, there are, you know, trees and leaves coming off, branches coming off, human infrastructure holding together for now, but as we get closer to the core of the storm, that's when even human infrastructure may begin to fail. And here in Perry, we're a little bit inland. Quite often the strongest winds are right on the shoreline. Now, because we're inland a little bit, it's going to lose just a bit of that strength as it comes in, because you know, when winds are going across the ocean, very smooth, no friction. When they hit lands, begin to get a little bit of friction, begins to slow that down a little bit. But it may not matter given how strong these winds are going to be. There we go. I can actually see upwind a little bit here, and I can see the gust coming towards me. I know it's about to get interesting, so I just get ready to brace myself because I don't know how fast it necessarily is going to be. So if there is debris flying, though, I will move. You'll see me suddenly jump off camera. But for now, you know, this is kind of an incredible storm to document. Just hope everybody is staying safe and the people that need to be evacuated are evacuated. Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mark, you're just talking about making landfall. I just want to show you this radar right now. You can see that eye wall of the storm. It continues to move closer and closer and push itself right over top of land. So this is close to the Big Bend Wildlife Management Area. So as Mark was talking about, landfall is likely to be in an area that doesn't have too many homes or too big of a population, which of course is good news. But Florida and the Gulf Coast, no stranger to major hurricanes making landfall. And just to show you some of the intense weather that this region has experienced, we take a look back right now at 3 major hurricanes that have made landfall in the Gulf Coast.
The Gulf of Mexico, a main route for hurricane traffic, often leading to rapid intensification and many times leading to destruction. We're about to highlight some Gulf of Mexico landfalling hurricanes, beginning with Hurricane Camille in August 1969. Forming in the Cayman Islands, it first blew through Cuba as a Category 3 hurricane, then intensified further in the Gulf of Mexico, making a beeline for Mississippi on August 18th. Now, the exact wind speeds will never truly be known as weather instruments were destroyed by the storm, but there are estimates of winds nearly 280 kilometers per hour. Camille brought with it a 24-foot storm surge, resulting in 259 deaths and more than $1.4 billion in damage. Over to Hurricane Katrina, the storm that compromised the New Orleans levee system, putting 80% of the city underwater. It started as a tropical wave moving toward Florida and made its first landfall at Hallandale Beach August 25, 2005, before it moved over the Gulf of Mexico the next day, only to undergo rapid intensification. Hurricane Katrina made its second landfall over southeastern Louisiana and Mississippi on August 29th. At this time, it was known as the costliest tropical cyclone ever on record until Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And finally, we feature Hurricane Michael in 2018 that made landfall on the Gulf Coast. This was the first Category 5 hurricane to strike the U.S. since Andrew in 1992. With a central pressure of 919 millibars, Michael was the third most intense hurricane to make landfall on U.S. soil. It was deemed a hurricane on October 8th off the coast of Cuba, and it, like many, rapidly intensified in the Gulf of Mexico to a Category 5 storm, packing winds of 260 kilometers an hour. It made landfall near Mexico Beach in the Florida Panhandle October 10th, 2018, flattening almost everything in its path. It caused a total of $25 billion in damage. For the Weather Network, I'm meteorologist Jacqueline Whittall.
And now we have another major hurricane to add to that list. Officially at 7:45 a.m., Hurricane Idalia made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane, an extremely dangerous hurricane. So this is the official messaging. It made landfall in the Florida Big Bend region near Keaton Beach. So that was 7:45 a.m. We've been tracking this storm as that eye wall continuously makes its way closer and closer to land. And now you can see that eye wall almost completely over land. So this is south of Perry, where Mark Robinson is. But as you look at the radar right now, you can see how heavy the rainfall is that is just about to hit the Perry region. And along with that statement of the storm officially making landfall, we also have word that water levels along the coast of Florida within the Big Bend region are rising rapidly. This is a situation that could mean life or death for people who have decided to stay within this coastal region. So I want to send things over to Mark Robinson right now. Mark, we're watching the radar and we're looking at this very heavy band headed towards Perry. Oh, it looks like we may have lost audio. Oh,
I appreciate getting
we're back.
Getting the updates. I'm going to have. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry. Welcome to live TV. This is what happens when things, in the middle of a hurricane. So yeah, I'm not gonna apologize for
You're all good,
issues,
Mark.
but,
you're all good.
Yeah, I haven't even had a chance to look at the radar. So you giving me a radar update, I actually appreciate very much. This one. Definitely, you can feel the ramp up with this as it's getting closer and closer. I'm getting heavy rain right now, but the one thing I've noticed since we last talked, oh, here we go. Like I think we're about to get a good amount of rain and wind right now. So I'm just watching up this way just to make sure there's no debris coming at me. Yeah, looks like I'm okay. So I can continue to tell you what's going on. But if you take a look behind, you can see the trees are beginning to get shredded. Those trees, branches, I'm expecting that to start coming down. Wow, look at that. You can actually, oh wow, look at all the trees. You can just see the flying, branches and leaves coming off this maple tree right here. So far, I'm not hearing any, large bangs and crashes, which is what I often hear in the midst of these hurricanes as the human infrastructure takes a hit. At this point, It's mostly been tree damage that we've seen. I've seen a little bit of debris here and there. Wow, the winds are just behind the bank right here are absolutely incredible. Dave can't even, like my cameraman Dave, can't even turn the camera because it'll be instantly covered in water. So you can sort of get an idea if we're looking way out over here. Now I'm still okay because I'm still behind this bank right here. So I'm pretty safe, but I just wanted to come over here to show you, where you're getting a lot of these strong winds pulling branches off, leaves off. And the one thing is if you've ever been in a blizzard, this is what you're getting. You're almost getting whiteout conditions here. So we're going to start to not be able to see some of those buildings back there, just like a blizzard. But this is just all rain. This is all wind and wind-driven rain, and it almost begins to feel like high-speed fog. Definitely, that's one of the three big dangers in hurricanes, of course, is the freshwater flooding, the storm surge, and the winds. Right now, we're just experiencing the freshwater flooding and the winds. So we don't have to worry about storm surge where we are here in Perry, because we're far enough away from that shoreline. But wow, I can tell you, the situation definitely getting worse and worse. The weather definitely deteriorating here in Perry, Florida. Rachel?
Mark, I kind of just want to leave it on that shot there, just to look at the sheets of rain coming through.
And it's like coming in waves.
Yeah.
It's not constant. So it really, you get like a little bit of time to gather yourself, but then he's getting hit by another one. It's very intense to see.
It is, Mark. You can just see the power of the wind. And Mark, if you want to get out of the shot, if you want to clear your eyes, go ahead, because I know it must not be easy standing there and experiencing that kind of weather. But look at the palm trees just whipping. So this is in Perry, Florida. So this is just to the north of where this hurricane has made landfall. The hurricane officially made landfall at 7:45 a.m. in Big Bend, Florida. It was over a wildlife management area. So if we can offer any sort of good news, at least it wasn't over a heavily populated area. But remember, where the eye wall makes landfall, where the hurricane makes landfall, that doesn't mean that's where the weather stops. We're looking at extremely catastrophic weather moving throughout the north of Florida today, across the Panhandle, within Georgia, up into the Carolinas. This story isn't done with Florida. What we're seeing is the official landfall. So that's sort of one step of this hurricane story. It's a big chapter of the hurricane story, but we still got a long book to read.
Yeah, because now that it's not over water, it's not going to be growing in intensification, but instead, while it dissipates, it's going to really bow out and fan out, so impacting a larger area as it begins to depreciate into maybe a tropical storm. But where Mark is right now, that shot that you were seeing is Perry. So right in the center of your screen, just south of it is where the eye did make landfall, and Mark has to be probably in the worst weather right now that tropical storm Idalia has to offer. You can see those reds and oranges. That's indicating very intense rainfall and likely seeing the tallest rain clouds and thunderstorms. So yeah, that was quite a sight to see. And as he was talking, you can see less and less of the background. So it's going to be interesting to see how much rain they really get, though it's going to be hard to measure with all the wind.
Now, Mark Robinson, I know him on screen, we know him off screen. I know this guy is very happy to be in that situation right now. He really did position himself in an excellent spot, a safe spot. You can see where Dave, our camera operator, was standing between those two brick walls, keeping them safe, but still in the distance being able to show you the intense winds, those palm trees being shredded, the rain being whipped across the street. It really is just such a remarkable scene. And Rachel, I know a lot of our audience, being Canadian, you see scenes like that and you think, okay, there's obviously a lot of weather happening down towards Florida. Could this have an impact to Canada? Could this have an impact to North America? Do you think we could fill in our audience just on that story, the Canadian possibility with Idalia?
Yeah, I think that that's really important, because often when we do see landfall in Florida, there's some times where it does impact anywhere from Ontario to Quebec to Atlantic Canada. So what models are projecting for Idalia's motion is to continue towards South Carolina, but instead of heading up the East Coast, it's actually looking like, although there is a little bit of model discrepancy, but it's looking like most models are favoring going out to sea. And why is that? Well, over in Canada, high pressure. This high pressure is going to be quite intense over the coming days, and that's going to help to steer not only Idalia, but Franklin too, out to shore, out towards the east. And it'll also be returning a little bit of summer in Ontario and Quebec, even Atlantic Canada, with the return of the 30s and lots of sunshine to come as we head into our next work week.
That area of high pressure being a very good defenseman at this time, that is for sure. All right, I want to take you out to Chris Murphy now, who's standing by at our national headquarters. Chris, you know, we've been talking so much about Idalia. We've been tracking this storm as it made landfall live throughout our live stream. That is official now. It made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane at 7:45 a.m. in the Big Bend region of Florida. Oh, Chris Murphy, come back. I got some questions for you.
I don't see you, so okay.
He's back.
There you go.
So, Chris, we're going to take a little pause now on Idalia, but let's talk about Franklin, because this is still a very strong hurricane with a lot of moisture, bringing a lot of moisture to a place that does not need really a drop more of rainfall.
No, that's a very good point.
And
what we've been seeing is some very heaviest rain is still offshore, but it is starting to move in. We've had thunderstorms. We've been noticing some of that, especially around the Bay of Fundy and Annapolis Valley. We are talking about rainfall that could go from today and into tomorrow, 50 to 100 millimeters of rain. The south coast of Newfoundland will likely be the hardest hit, so Port aux Basques, Burgeo area, southern Avalon, as well as coastal Nova Scotia. You could see 40 to 80 plus millimeters, and even sections of New Brunswick and PEI up to 50 millimeters. Now, regarding the wind, this is going to be a saving grace, because when Hurricane Dorian came in, there was a lot of rain before the storm arrived, and when those winds came in, and they were terrible winds, the branches weren't flying off. It was the trees getting completely uprooted because the soil was so soft, so wet. So we know how wet it has been across the Maritimes, Nova Scotia especially. So we're looking more likely at winds maybe 60 kilometers per hour, perhaps locally up to 80 in portions of Newfoundland, where maybe we could see tropical storm force winds for several hours. But we don't anticipate hurricane force winds, and as a result, should not get those uprooted trees, which was such a nightmare through Halifax and contributed across Nova Scotia to one of the largest power outage events ever. And Nathan Coleman, you were with me when that happened, and I remember when we were driving around, remember from Point Pleasant Park and trying to get back to downtown, it was like an obstacle course trying to get through. Like, nope, got power lines down here. Nope, we got a tree trunk in front of us here. So likely we're not going to see a repeat of that.
No, yes, I was, thinking about that with Mark down there now. It's you can go to an area to set up, but it's getting out that can be tricky. And I remember how saturated the ground was during Dorian, and that's why it all fell over so quickly. And it's a similar setup here in terms of the ground being wet, lots of rain, but thankfully we're missing those extreme winds, because if we did see those, the trees wouldn't take too much to topple over. So thankfully, just the rain to really be concerned about here in Halifax. Last time we spoke, it was I was in a bit of a dry slot, but the rain has since picked up. So you do want to reduce your speeds if you're out there on the road heading out this morning, because it's also quite foggy out here in Nova Scotia. So thankfully not a direct hit from Franklin, but it's really drawing from that tropical moisture. So we could see those numbers get boosted up right now, expecting anywhere from 50 to 80 millimeters in parts of Nova Scotia. So if a thunderstorm trains over the area, that could be another risk.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that is the primary threat too. Thank you, Nathan Coleman. Just going to show you, we've had more than 100 millimeters of rain each month above normal in June, July, and August. And look, there's Nate. There's going back to Dorian, and this is what I remember seeing when the trees were getting uprooted. They were initially planted in and around sidewalks. It buckled the entire pavement up, and like scenes that I know I had never seen before. Herring Cove. I mean, to see these these boathouses get swept aside. The government pier was destroyed down that way as well. So Nathan, I'm thankful we're not going to see destruction like that, and largely because Franklin's track is it's going to be well out to sea. However, the rain should not be underplayed by this, because there's really, the ground is so saturated, there's very little for that rain to go anywhere. Watch out for the swells though too. Remember, we've got this the super moon, the full moon, the second one of the month. So tides are going to be higher during high tide, and we want to make sure we respect Mother Nature's coastal areas for sure. All right, let's go back to Rachel. And I know you've been standing by with Mark Robinson because what's going on in Florida is very pressing and in some cases dire.
It absolutely is. And, you know, this is the strongest hurricane to make landfall in the Big Bend region in over 125 years. At 7:45 a.m., Hurricane Idalia officially made landfall as a Category 3 storm. So let's take a look at the satellite. Or actually, you know what? We're not bright enough yet. So we're almost there. We're not quite there yet, but we're going to show you satellite in a second. We've been showing you the radar, and the radar has been really interesting because we've been looking at these super heavy bands of rain, and Mark Robinson, one of them just crossed right over top of him. So we're going to be joining Mark Robinson. He's in Perry. We've been showing you some of the scenes as to how devastating this storm has been already. So I just want to take a look back to yesterday when Ron DeSantis was begging people to get out of Florida, and now, of course, we're seeing why.
It's definitely going to hit the Big Bend. Everywhere in the Big Bend is going to get storm surge, is going to see major impact, whether the eye wall's hitting you or not. So please prepare for that. The National Hurricane Center advisory includes that if this storm hits at high tide, storm surge could reach 10 to 15 feet in some areas of the Big Bend. That is life-threatening storm surge. That is storm surge that if you're there while that hits, it's going to be very difficult to survive that. So please take appropriate precautions. You really got to go back to the late 1800s to find a storm of this magnitude that will enter tomorrow. So it's likely to cause a lot of damage, and that's just the reality. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to lose power, and just know that there's a lot of folks that are going to be there to help you get back on your feet.
And that was the messaging yesterday from the press conference. Now we know that all of that unfortunately did come true with a major hurricane, Idalia, making landfall in the Big Bend region. Over 116,000 people in the state of Florida are without power. There is over 1,000 people from the National Guard who are ready to help, to rescue, to help the recovery. This is going to be a long story. And Mark, we are just looking at the scene behind you. It has deteriorated so much. Ron DeSantis was talking about the tide and how the tide is going to become such an issue when you pair that with the storm surge, potentially making it worse for the coast. Now, Mark, I'm also hearing you sort of say ow and grab your head. Are you being hit with debris right now?
No, rain mostly, and my head's actually a little bit itchy, to be honest. That's all I was doing, was trying to scratch right through there. But what I was saying wow at is the trees that are coming apart behind me. You know, the other thing, Rachel, that I've noticed in about the last 5 minutes, it went from fairly bright, and I suddenly looked around and said, wait a second, it's gotten dark again. And I heard you talking about that band sort of coming over top of us. I think that's exactly what's happening. We're in those deep towers, those very tall towers. I mean, you're seeing just a gray sky right here, but if you were able to sort of see down from above or above the clouds, you would see these gigantic clouds, these gigantic towers, you know, above us right now as this storm makes its way inland. So we lose a little bit of that sunlight, even though it is it's daylight here. We're in the tropics. I mean, you expect bright sunshiny day. This is the exact opposite of that. It does actually remind me of being in some of the storms in Ontario where you get those dark gray skies. Same sort of thing happening here, except that this is just continuous. And that's one of the big dangers when you talk about hurricanes. It doesn't hit and go. It hits and it hits and it hits and it just keeps going. Well, I often say that tornadoes are a sprint, hurricanes are a marathon. And that is, of course, the big danger with these, because it just continues on. If you're watching, this whole thing, you hope that
it looks like Mark Robinson's feed is breaking up a little bit. We're going to wait till we get that stronger connection, and then we're going to take you back into Mark. Rachel, you can just see all of that intense rainfall that continues to come through, the winds as well. And I really liked Mark's comparison there. A hurricane is a marathon because we know that, we just saw the landfall, 7:45 a.m. Now this storm continues to drop intense, heavy amounts of rain. The water levels around the coast of Florida rapidly rising. We'll continue to see this storm bring catastrophic rainfall likely into Georgia, into the Carolinas. So I guess from this point, we officially see the eye of the hurricane right over land. What are the concerns next?
Well, the concerns next are going to be really how much rainfall accumulates over Perry. I'm seeing the radar indicated levels here, and we're talking about almost 100 millimeters just after it made landfall.
Yeah,
so
that's
really
fast.
within 30 minutes or so. So localized flooding is going to be a major concern. The storm surge as well, it's still making its way onto shore. So we are expecting to see high water levels. I believe reports along the northwest coast did measure around 5 meters already. And that's about 10 to 15 feet is what they were anticipating. We're also going to be looking at severe weather along the bands. As the sun rises, like with the satellite what we showed you, the sun is just getting up, and as we get more of that daytime heating, we're going to get more energy that's going to be fueling the outer bands, the thunderstorms of Idalia that extend all the way past Tampa. So we're likely going to be seeing a continuation of tornado warnings, tornado watches, and very heavy rainfall extending all the way across not only Florida, but Georgia and also North Carolina.
All right, I want to send things back out to Mark Robinson again. We've also had a question that's been asking us about Jacksonville. So Rachel, just after we're done with Mark, we're going to get an update on Jacksonville and we'll focus in on that area. But Mark, you were in Florida to cover Ian. Now you're in Florida to cover Idalia. Both of these names beginning with an I, which quite often we get I hurricane names that do come right at the end of August, beginning of September and have a lot of strength. Can you compare the two storms? Are they feeling kind of similar?
That's a really good question. Rachel, I'm gonna preempt you just for a second. We're getting wind shifts right now. So the wind is coming this way, and then all of a sudden it'll turn around and start coming back the other way. So poor Dave is trying to, get the best shot he can. So, he's getting soaked over there. I'm wearing my dry suit. The one thing that we can compare between the two of them is definitely the wind. The one thing. Sorry, I'm hearing like debris flying over there. I'm just watching my my friend Scott McPartland. He's just making sure that he's safe over there. What we've got is these strong winds beginning to sort of pick up, and that was the one thing that we noticed in Hurricane Ian, was that the backside of the eye wall was much stronger than the front side. This one, I'm not even sure yet because it's still coming through, but those winds ramping up towards what we saw in Ian. Now, we're not going to see them as strong as what we saw in Ian because this one is category 3, and as it comes on shore, they lose a bit of strength. And they become, just because they're getting their fuel. So hurricanes get their fuel from the ocean. Once they're on shore, the fuel's cut off, and that's it. It makes its way on shore, and it can lose strength fairly rapidly. So that's what we're just watching for right now, probably getting into some of the stronger parts with this storm. But the one thing that is different between the two of them is something I said just right at the beginning. In Hurricane Ian, there was just this constant, wind this direction, and that was it. Here, we're getting winds in this direction, and then all of a sudden they'll whip around and come in this direction. Also, we've seen lightning in that, and I've seen a couple of lightning bolts, and it seems to be cloud to cloud at this point, but definitely an interesting aspect to this storm. But I can tell you, that wind and the rain and the wind is getting a little bit stingy. It's just starting to sting my face as it's hitting me. And I'm a little bit behind shelter. I would not want to be standing out there because that is where the debris is flying. And I want to make sure that I'm safe, my crew's safe, everybody's safe down here, as safe as we can, but yet bring you this storm. Back inside to you, Rachel. Here we go. Wind shift again.
Oh my goodness. Mark, you've been out there for several hours now. Is this pretty much, are you at the worst point thus far?
You know what, Chris, so far, yeah, but like the last second I thought, yeah, it was the worst a second ago, and now it's the worst now. So like, I can't really tell you that worst of it yet, because it just keeps getting the situation, or the weather just keeps deteriorating here in Perry. And we're just gonna have, we're only gonna know how bad it's gonna be after it's all done. Oh my goodness, yeah, I just have to watch now this way.
All right, so this storm obviously having lots of threats here. Thank you, Mark. We'll get back to Mark Robinson shortly. You've got the damaging winds, you've got the flooding rains, you've got the tornado risk, and of course you've got the storm surge risk as well. And just again, a visual representation of what a storm surge is. That is the rise in the normal sea levels, which during a storm become abnormally high, and they get pushed inland a little bit by pressure, but primarily by the winds. And it's not just coastal areas, but inland for several kilometers can be under the threat, and the storm surge is right up there. It's often the main killer of these hurricanes, not to mention extreme damage. So this storm has now moved inland. Does not mean the threats are over. There's still the flooding, urban flash floods and urban floods that are going to happen through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina in the coming hours and days. And Rachel, not to mention that, of course, we are in this super moon, the super blue moon, because of course we had the full moon in the beginning of August and also to end August. And that, during a full moon or a new moon, that can make the extremes between high tides and low tides more noticeable. But you throw a super moon in, well, you're putting everything on overdrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for that update. We're going to be checking back in with Mark Robinson. And remember, we also have Nathan Coleman in the field as well in Halifax, where some of the bands from Franklin, which is a Category 2 hurricane, will be making its way into the HRM in Nova Scotia today. So that story is also coming up. Now, Rachel, we started this live stream at about 7 a.m. We have watched this storm make landfall near Keaton Beach. This is in the Big Bend region of Florida, officially at 7:45 a.m. as a major hurricane, a Category 3 hurricane. This is the first time this has happened in the last 125 years. Mark Robinson is in Perry, and we can see that the eye of the storm is just to the south of Perry. So Mark is experiencing some of the worst weather right now that this hurricane has to offer as it makes landfall in Florida. Now, a lot of our viewers on the live stream, we thank you so much for staying with us, for sharing this weather story with us as we try to explain what is happening in Florida and with Franklin in the Atlantic. And we did have a question from Jacksonville, and we encourage you to ask us questions if you want Rachel to take a specific look at the radar. If you are in a tornado warning, for example, we can look at some of these things within our weather data. And we did have a question about Jacksonville and what they will be experiencing over the next few hours.
Well, it looks like Jacksonville got pretty loud wake up. You can see the very strong thunderstorms continuing to push north into Brunswick and eventually into Georgia. Jacksonville, it was in a little bit of a lull, but these outer bands of Idalia are going to be making their way towards you. So you're going to be seeing periods of heavy rainfall on and off until we get what Mark is in, making its way closer to you. So that's where the bands could get a little bit more intense. And I believe that you are also in a tornado watch. So I'm just going to double check those warnings. Yes, you are. So if you're in a tornado watch in Jacksonville, and really anywhere that is highlighted in orange, all the way up into Georgia, the coastline there too, you're going to want to make sure that you're staying up to date with weather alerts throughout today as Idalia makes its way across the Florida panhandle and bringing that severe weather throughout this afternoon and evening.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to take you back into Perry, Florida now, where we join storm hunter Mark Robinson. Mark, I know when you're on the ground, it's hard to check social media and the radar and all the latest from the Hurricane Center, even when the weather is nice. So I can't imagine how challenging it is for you right now. As you, looks like something's happening here. Let's just leave it on this shot of Mark right now for just
sorry
a
about that,
second.
Rachel. We had,
okay,
I heard debris starting to come around the side of the building, so I wanted to make sure that I was not in the debris stream because of the variable winds, we're getting sort of debris flying in all different directions. So my head is literally on a swivel right now to ensure that I'm okay, and there isn't something flying towards me. But I did want to show you back over here in that sort of very strong winds. In this area, it's coming around the side of the bank building that we're hiding underneath. And the one thing I have to say, Rachel, it's a little bit hard to hear you because there's so much water in my ears. So I literally have to, dry off my headphones so that I can hear you. So if you say something to me and I don't reply, it's because I can't actually hear anything. This is the situation that happens with these hurricanes. Yeah, there we go.
Wow.
There we go. So yeah, definitely. Again, there's not a lot in this direction, so I'm not too concerned about flying debris, but I am going to pull back a little bit more closer to our shelter because of that danger of flying debris. Remember, it's not how fast the wind is blowing, it's what the wind is blowing. And debris, of course, when you're talking about this section of the hurricane, away from the storm surge, this is the biggest danger in this part of the hurricane, is that flying debris. So far, the human infrastructure in Perry seems to be holding up pretty well. The trees being shredded, but I haven't seen any major trees down yet. I do expect that's going to change. Yeah, I'm watching over here, and I'm actually seeing really large, as I'm saying, I'm watching large branches come ripping off the trees and go flying into the wind blast. Yeah, Dave's going to sort of point it over in that direction so you can see it. But almost any direction that we point the camera right now, it's just getting coated with mist and rain. So sometimes it's very difficult to see, but we're trying to document this as best we can. Wow. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but Dave, if you turn the camera upwards, you can actually see how fast the clouds are going past us. And we're getting just a little bit of light, it's getting a little bit light right here, which is kind of fascinating, which means we may be very close to the eye of the hurricane itself. The original plan wasn't to be right in the eye, but these are the things that happen when, it's always very variable, but we wanted to sort of document this storm as best we could and bring this to our audience at the Weather Network to show what it's like to be in one of these major hurricanes. And then again, this is a bit of a historic one because these hurricanes are very rare in the Big Bend area. We don't see major hurricanes making landfall here very often at all. And here in Perry, they're definitely they're going through the bulk of it. They're going through the brunt of it. It's really beginning to hit in this area. And I'm hoping, my fingers are crossed, that everybody is safe at this point, because the storm surge, that's further down the coast, but that is one of the biggest things that's going to happen with this hurricane. This area is very, very prone to storm surge, so my fingers are crossed that everybody is safe. Rachel?
Yeah, Mark, and you know what, if you can hear me, I just want to give you an update right now as I look at the radar, because I know it's very challenging for you to keep on top of the radar. You right now are in the worst of the weather that Hurricane Idalia is offering. In Perry, we are seeing multiple lightning strikes. We're seeing some of the heaviest rainfall, very strong winds, as the eye of the storm is just to the south of you. And it looks like this eye of the storm is actually starting to dissipate just a little bit. And that clear sky, that bit of bright sky that you might see, I think that would be the eye.
Yeah, Rich, it's real. I can't actually hear you. I could just barely hear you in there. I think you're asking, where the eye is and how it was coming on shore. And yeah, when this eye comes on, the interesting thing about hurricanes is you'll have the winds blasting in this direction, and then as it begins to pass by, we'll see a switch around, and the winds will start coming in an opposite direction. So we may actually have to move the cars and move everything around so that we can actually continue to shoot, because we don't want the cameras to get wet. And that's one of the big issues with these hurricanes, is how variable the conditions can get. Now it looks like we're in just a little bit of a lull right now, so that's I did expect that we might be into the eye or into the eye wall fairly close to this time period. So we're going to try and do our best to bring this to you as this continues on. But yeah, I may be able to take just a minute or two while we have just a little bit of a lull. But of course, as soon as I say that, that things are going to change. Rachel?
Absolutely. Now, Idalia now is the third hurricane to make landfall in Florida just over this past year. We had Ian in September 2022, Nicole in October 22, and now Idalia August 2023. So Florida is no stranger to this kind of weather. But what we have been seeing behind Mark Robinson, that really is extreme. And just a reminder, I want to put it into perspective. Mark is in the worst of this storm. We are not seeing the entire state of Florida experiencing weather like that. Just to put it into perspective for everyone, Mark has situated himself in Perry, and you can see that extremely heavy band of rainfall going over the Perry region. The landfall was officially at 7:45 a.m. in the Big Bend region of Florida. And Rachel, when we talk about the potential for tornadoes, for storm surge, these are all events that are going to play out as we go throughout the day today. So walk us through some of these really next chapters when it comes to Idalia.
Well, I also want to point out, like, if you asked me, Rachel, where the most intense weather is, I would say Perry. Like, you could just see it's right where the eye wall has just dissipated, and I'm not surprised that Mark is experiencing that change of wind direction, the slight clearing, and all of that. Where is Idalia expected to go throughout today? I will go to our track so we can see. It does look like we'll be making a little bit of a shift towards the north and east. Still has a pretty strong hurricane as it makes its way into Georgia. And as the sun rises, we're going to be getting more of that solar energy. So that daytime heating, our temperatures are going to rise, and that means our thunderstorm energy is also going to rise. So we're going to expect to see a continuation of tornadoes. There are no warnings in place for Florida and Georgia, but watches are in place because that means we have the environment that could produce tornadoes. And it's all within those outer bands of Idalia where we have that convection. And like you mentioned, thousands and thousands of lightning strikes. And those only really just sparked up in the Perry region as that made its way onto shore. But lots of intense weather still to come on and off for residents of Florida.
And for people who decided to stay within these regions, we are looking now at over 116,000 people without power. We are looking at the waters rapidly rising along the coast, and that can be the deadliest and most dangerous part of any storm. So as we look here at the hurricane warning, no doubt places like Tampa are in it within the Big Bend region. In Jacksonville, we were just giving an update from that earlier. Tropical storm warning is in place here, and you can see sort of the track that Idalia is going to take and those hurricane warnings sort of paving a path for that.
Yeah, all the way up into North Carolina's shores as well. We have tropical storm watches and warnings in effect. Good news is it does not appear like Idalia is going to make impacts to Canada, though we are seeing impacts from Hurricane Franklin, which is that other hurricane you see towards the right. Not making landfall, but the moisture. It's something that you don't want to see, especially in Atlantic Canada. I believe Halifax is having one of its, if not rainiest, summers on record. And what we're going to be seeing is a trough pulling in the moisture from which once was Major Hurricane Franklin. So Nathan Coleman is going to be continuing to be with us into the 9 o'clock hour, and he's going to be experiencing heavy rainfall off and on as well. So no impact from Idalia, but seeing impacts ongoing right now from Franklin.
Absolutely. And I just want to show you some video and some of the images that have been coming into our newsroom as we've been watching these storms come onshore. You can see Perry in Florida. This was about an hour ago. This was just before Mark Robinson joined us. You could see that generator in the background blowing out. There's been so much lightning within the region. Lots of thunderstorms have been reported within that heavy band of rain that has been moving throughout Perry. You can see in St. Petersburg in Florida, this is storm surge. This is not rainfall creating this flooding. This is storm surge as essentially the ocean waters get pushed onshore because of the strength of this storm and essentially the draw of this storm as it moves these water levels continuously up and up. And this again, Rachel, as we were talking, this is extremely scary and dangerous.
It is, and I just put on a few of the counties that were in the worst of the storm surge impacts here, Jefferson all the way to Citrus. And that's where we were expecting to see anywhere from 10 to 16 feet of water making its way through. And just taking a look at the topography too of Florida, it's at or just above sea level. So we're going to be expecting to see that water really encroach inland. But like we mentioned, good news is it's not a very overly populated region, and the highway itself is farther inland as well. So we won't be seeing a lot of highway closures or impacts due to the surge, hopefully.
Now let's talk about Idalia, because right now this is really its first chance that it's had to interact with land. What happens to a hurricane once it loses its sort of formation over water and then it starts to interact with land?
Well, it loses its energy. It loses its source of fuel, which is the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico in this case. So once that eye goes over land, it's not getting any fuel, so it begins to dissipate. We're going to be seeing its winds begin to slow down, but at the same time, instead of being a very tight storm, it fans out. So it'll be bringing impacts to a wider area of North America and the southern states. You can kind of see it here if I pull up the satellite, the difference between Idalia and Franklin. You can see how big Franklin's eye is and how wide of an area that it impacts. That's because it's tracking into colder waters, it's losing its warm fuel, and it is beginning to dissipate. That's what we're going to expect Idalia to do. It will take up a larger area, but begin to weaken, not as a major hurricane, but still be impacting as a tropical storm.
It's interesting to see the difference of those two storms, and Idalia still with a lot of steam left to go. We want to take you back into Florida with Mark Robinson. And Mark, we were just putting into perspective for our audience that you right now are experiencing the worst of the weather. Wow. Oh, you can see that debris flying in the background. Okay, Mark, we want you to be safe. Mark, don't feel like you need to explain anything. If you just want to look around, let's just leave it on this shot right now. I just want to sort of just have a look and just time to sort of digest this scene, because that is pretty scary, Mark.
Yeah, Rachel, I can tell you this is getting close to the, I believe this is actually the eye wall. We were expecting to be a little further outside of the eye wall, but we seem to be in the worst of it. And the reason I was sort of looking at that, because I know my friend Scott McPartland was over sort of in this direction when that gust hit, and I was a little concerned. He's okay, everything's fine. He's just walking back towards the car now. But we're getting those wind shifts coming around. This may be one of the more intense parts of the storm, and this may go on for a while. And you know, like we said before, you know, it's all about the marathon of this. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, just trying to. Oh boy. Yeah, I'm just gonna step out for a second so that Dave can document this, because this is something else. Dave, if you point the camera, over in that direction. People are driving around. I'm going to suggest it's not the greatest idea right now because of the flying debris, but I'm going to be quiet for a second so that you can hear the roar that is beginning here. Now, Rachel, you were asking me about the difference between this one and Ian. This is definitely beginning to remind me now of what Ian was like, because we look behind me. I mean, you can just see this wind just slamming down this street. This is what Ian looked like. So we're definitely seeing some of the strongest winds I've seen in this hurricane yet. Okay, and this is why I'm actually looking in this direction. Now, I'm protected by a very sturdy bank building right here, but if I was to step out into that wind blast, that would be something else and likely to get it bounced around. This is my friend Tim Millar, who's come back right now. He's sampling the worst of it as best he could. And he's got the whole system on top of his car. I'll take you over here, Dave, if you can. You can see, there's the anemometer right there, and that's what Tim's trying to sample the worst of the hurricane, trying to sample the eye and the eye wall. So yeah, definitely a lot of people out here to try and get a little bit of data, try and get that data back to places like the Weather Network, and we're trying to show you, how bad these systems can get, how bad these hurricanes can get. We're going to see a bit of a wind shift as the other side of the eye wall begins to sort of push past us. So right now that wind is kind of coming in this direction, from sort of around the building like this. But we're likely going to see that switch around. So when we come back to me later, we're likely to see the winds going in this direction as opposed to this one. And that's what's that's really super interesting about it. And I'm going to step back into the wind blast. Going to take a quick look. No debris coming. And I'm just going to step back out of here, out of the shelter, just for a second, so that you can get an idea of what it's what it's like. You probably hear the wind or the rain sort of bouncing off of my mic here. There's a lot of dirt getting into my eyes. Now I'm going to step back where I'm back into a bit of shelter here. And just try to stay as safe as possible as this whole system pulls through. A few more storm chasers coming in here. I think a lot of people are saying, okay, here we go. You're into the worst of it. Let's get into shelter, make sure that we can document this. Yeah, and a little bit of lightning up right now. So yeah, this has been the story of this storm, is the variability in the winds and the rain that we've seen here in Perry. Wow, it's changing up again. We might be into, if not into the eye itself, we might be right on the edge.
Yeah, Mark, it looks like you are right on the edge of that eye wall. So that's where the most intense weather of this hurricane is right now. Some of the strongest winds, the heaviest rains. That is what Mark Robinson is experiencing. And I have never been in a hurricane, but I have experienced a nor'easter in Atlantic Canada. And you are just absolutely soaked. Every ounce of you is just soaking wet. So that's the type of day that Mark Robinson is going to be experiencing today. Mark's got the right gear on with the helmet, with the rain suit. He certainly needs it. So let's just take a look at this radar again, and let's look at, so what we're going to focus on right now is where Mark is. He is in Perry, and you can see that extremely heavy band of rain has just gone over the region, and Mark is starting to report that he's almost seeing a bit of a clear sky come through. That would be the eye of the storm. But Rachel, as we zoom out, let's look at the size of this and what's left to go, or what is to come, let's say.
Yeah, you see the outer bands are reaching all the way south of Tampa and all the way north into Savannah, and there's going to be multiple rounds of them sweeping across. It looks like quite a washout in Tampa, but you do look like you'll be out of the probably most dangerous part of the storm, which is right where Mark is in Perry. That is beginning to push along the Interstate 10 here. Eventually it'll be making its way through Madison, Valdosta, Interstate 75. So we're going to be starting to see these impacts push farther inland, affecting travel, affecting any folks that are out on the roadways like we saw in the background. There were some cars that weren't just storm chasers. So folks that are out and about will be seeing the most intense heavy rain, lots of lightning. Now, the lightning is what's showing you that this is the most convective part of the storm. This is the most intense thunderstorm area, intense rainfall, and wow, have a look at how much lightning that we're starting to see. In that last scan, 500 strikes,
wow.
And that's 500 strikes a minute. So that's telling me that there's a lot of energy still to come with that outer band of the eye wall that Mark is in.
Now, as we look at a similar track of a hurricane to make landfall, it was a bit further to the north, but in October 2018, Michael made landfall in Florida, and we saw such devastation with this storm. We saw deaths, we saw storm surge. Of course, the winds were catastrophic. The power outages were lengthy. And we are looking at similar strength when it comes to Idalia, but just in a different spot, of course, in this Big Bend region, which makes it so unique because we haven't seen a hurricane make landfall in the Big Bend region for 125 years. So a lot of these people experiencing some of the most catastrophic, intense weather with this storm. And for many, it could be the first time. It could be the first. It looks like in history it has been the first time in this area. What I'm going to be more concerned about going forward is as it tracks towards areas like Tallahassee, more inland. That's a region in Florida that has a lot of forests and a lot of nature reserves. So if those winds begin to really wrap around and ramp up, we could be seeing extensive wind damage, more power outages. I'm sure that there's going to be more than the hundreds of thousands that are already climbing across Florida. And that's going to be reaching all the way into Georgia as well. So as this begins to dissipate, we're going to expect those winds to blow out and affect a larger area of land. So the tree damage, I think, is going to continue to climb as we head throughout Wednesday. Now, storm surge. Let's talk a little bit about this. Storm surge is always a huge concern when it comes to hurricanes, and it can be the most deadliest part of the storm. So as we look at this water moving on land, a lot of the updates from the National Hurricane Center say the water levels are rapidly rising right now in the Big Bend area. You can see how devastating the storm surge is. This is just from this morning in St. Petersburg. So Rachel, can we talk a little bit about how the tide and the full moon is making the storm surge situation potentially more devastating?
Yes, because my pastime is space science too. But
we picked the right person.
But what happens when we have a full moon, and especially in the orbit that it's in, it's something called perigee. So that means that the moon is the closest it's going to be in its orbit to the Earth. So when that happens, we get an extra gravitational pull from the moon, and water is a liquid, so it actually bulges out. And when that happens, we get high tide. And for folks in Florida, they often know when a full moon happens, we get high tides. It's extra high because it is in perigee right now. It's extra eerie because it's a blue moon and a super moon, the second full moon of August. And naturally, our water levels are going to be high. And now we're going to combat that with a major hurricane making landfall. So the ingredients for very destructive storm surge and coastal erosion and coastal damage is really all teed up for Idalia.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to give you an update. We're just getting this into our newsroom. There is almost 170,000 people in Florida right now without power. We are looking at, in the Tampa region and the St. Petersburg region right now, about 1.4 meters of surge. So this is starting to become a life-threatening situation. You know, we've seen the video from St. Petersburg and those water levels rapidly rising. This is a region where people absolutely need to get out and need to evacuate. I've seen some videos, just my time here working at the Weather Network, of storm surge coming in, and it doesn't come in over an hour or two. In some areas, it can be minutes where that storm water is way too high and you are in a life-threatening situation, and it's overwhelming. It basically develops its own current as if you were in the ocean, and now that ocean is in your neighborhood, in your backyard, on the street that maybe you would take to work. And you know, the government of Florida, they knew that this situation was going to be so bad. They encouraged people to leave the state if they were in these highly affected areas. They waived all of the tolls on the highways. If that was a highway that you could get out, they just waived all the tolls and said, take it and get out of here. So let's take a look at some of the regions that are going to be at the highest risk for this horrible storm surge.
Well, this dark pinkish red that you're seeing, that is the storm surge warning. So we're looking at areas along the coast south from Tallahassee all the way into Tampa. Tampa has reported 1.4 meters of surge. Could maybe get a little bit stronger for areas that are north of Tampa. But the way Tampa is situated, I'm just going to go in here and move this one graphic so you can see. Any sort of wind like Idalia is bringing that comes right into the canal, you could see some pretty good damage up through Tampa. Just the way that it's oriented and that wind coming from going towards the northeast rather. So it has been reported 1.4 meters of surge. I believe that's about my height, if not more. Yeah. So if you are in an area that is prone to that storm surge, like I mentioned, some of the counties that were under a evacuation order, Jefferson, Taylor, Dixie, Levy, and Citrus, that's where we're going to be having the highest storm surge. But if you're seeing that affect your region, you want to get to the highest level of your home as possible. And really, it's a little bit too late to evacuate, but you're going to want to just hunker down, make sure you have some cell service, make sure somebody knows where you are.
Get to higher ground.
And get to the highest ground that you possibly can.
Absolutely. Now, as we look at the storm surge, I just want to show you yesterday, around the hospital in Tampa, they actually were building this aqua fence. And this must be something new and innovative in order to combat climate change, in order to combat extremely dangerous weather. And they were building this aqua fence around the hospital in Tampa. And this fence is completely waterproof, and it is set to withstand about 15 feet of storm surge within the Tampa region. This is actually bolted to the ground in order to keep this region safe and people in the hospital safe. We did see multiple evacuations of hospitals, though, within the Florida region. I was watching some video yesterday as well of offices actually wrapping all of their computers in plastic bags, all of the electronics in plastic bags, just hoping to keep potentially some things out of the water if the storm surge does continue to reach these high levels, which will inundate buildings. It really is a scary scene, and it really goes to show that the planning that needs to happen in order to keep these regions safe, because with our data and with our ability to forecast these events, we can really tell what is coming.
Yeah, we really can, and especially with a major hurricane like Idalia was, and currently still is, Category 3 as it made its way towards land and made landfall earlier this morning. But with storms like this, it's imminent that storm surge is going to be an issue, especially for Florida. The elevation is at or just above sea level, and the orientation of the Big Bend and the way that this storm tracked through. There's no surprise to me that we're seeing meters and meters of rain making its way into land.
And this here is a look at Keaton Beach in Florida. This is where Idalia officially made landfall at 7:45 a.m. this morning. This is in the Big Bend region of Florida. You can see the rain coming down sideways, just this storm ripping this flag apart. It's a horrible scene to see, and I couldn't even imagine someone having to live and stay within that region. You can see here on this graphic, this is exactly where Idalia has made landfall at 7:45 a.m. as a major hurricane, a Category 3 storm. And Rachel, the water temperatures played such a huge role with this storm being able to grab a lot of fuel, a lot of moisture and strength. So let's talk a little bit about these ocean temperatures and why that was such a factor for this major hurricane.
Well, when you're looking at hurricane growth, you need at least 27 degrees of temperature of water. And what we had was ample. We had 30 to 31. This is a look at Wednesday, but it was even warmer when Idalia was really convective and growing. So that you could think of as maybe like Gatorade or storm juice. It's just sucking all of that heat and energy from the ocean and really created the beast that Idalia was as it made landfall. And in such a short amount of time, because we had that extra 3 to 4 degrees, we had that extra energy. And in 12 hours, this storm went from a Category 4, from when I fell asleep last night at 9 p.m. to when I woke up this morning around 3, it was a Category 3 or getting close to Category 4. Yeah. So in just short 12 hours, that extra heat and that extra energy just really was the
ignition.
It's fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. Now I want to take a look at this quick feature to just show you the relationship between these warm water temperatures and the strength of hurricanes. We'll take a look at this and then we'll come back to our active weather set, and then we're also going to join Mark Robinson. He'll be with us in just minutes.
Hurricanes are storms born from the ocean. Unlike temperate cyclones, which get their energy from the temperature difference between two air masses, hurricanes get their energy from the warm tropical waters. You need about 26 or 27 degrees Celsius to a depth of about 150 meters to sustain a hurricane. Any colder than that, and either the hurricane won't get going or it will weaken very rapidly. This is also why we don't have a lot of very strong hurricanes north of Cape Hatteras, and especially as we get up to Nova Scotia, those cold waters simply won't sustain very strong hurricanes. This is also why climate change can potentially be so dangerous. A lot of the energy, or most of the energy from our warming planet is going into the oceans. It's warming the waters and potentially creating conditions that will sustain or develop stronger hurricanes all the way up and down throughout the Atlantic and Pacific. And this is why ocean scientists and meteorologists are so concerned about severe storms.
Absolutely, and we saw that exactly play out this morning. Here's a look at just some of the highlights when it comes to Idalia. This officially made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane, 7:45 a.m. this morning in the Big Bend region of Florida. There is a state of emergency, we're going to correct the spelling on that, in 4 states, and over 200,000 people with power outages, mainly in Florida. And Rachel, when we talk about the power outages, we have seen this rapidly climb. There was about 116,000 without power just as that eye wall was was making its way on land, and now we're over 200,000. We know that the state of Florida has been prepared for this. They knew that this forecast would happen. The messaging was very strong yesterday to evacuate and get out of the state, but they knew that some people would stay. And of course, they knew that they needed to bring a lot of people back onto the grid. So they have over 1,000 people from the National Guard working and over 30,000 people who are ready to restore power within Florida, of course, when it is safe to do so. So now let's take things out to our newsroom with meteorologist Chris Murphy. Chris, let's talk a little bit about this hurricane and if it could have any Canadian impacts, because quite often when we see a lot of moisture in the Gulf, it could play a role in provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and then of course the Maritimes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rachel. By then it's no longer a hurricane, it's a remnant low or a depression of sorts. This one looks like it's going to steer out to the Atlantic at this point in time. There's a look, just wanted to show you where the center of the storm is. So clearly it has moved inland, just as we've been talking about it, and Mark, but just because it's moved inland doesn't mean the threats are over. And I actually want to discuss two threats right here. One is the tornado risk. Now take a look. It's not so much right near the center, but some of these outer bands around it, and tornado watches have been from Tampa to Palm Bay and northwards to southeast Georgia. Now typically tornadoes from hurricanes don't rival what you get from those supercells. You don't often get EF4s or EF5s, but you got to imagine you've got the pouring rain, you've got storm surge, you've got the strong winds, and if you get an EF2 hurricane tornado, that would do more than enough damage to exacerbate. So that is the other threat. Also the storm surge as well. And we're talking about storm surge that could go, 3, 4, even 5 meters above normal sea level. And 1 meter storm surge can be life-threatening. And once you get up to 3 or 4. And also another thing I want to mention is that the continental shelf, which is really just the submerged land well beyond the state's boundaries, extends about 300 kilometers outside of Florida, and it is very shallow. The water is quite shallow in the Gulf of Mexico, meaning that when you get these winds and pushes the water in, the water really has nowhere to go except inland. So anywhere along the Gulf, we hear about Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Gulf side of Florida. When there's a storm surge, that is a particularly vulnerable area. A lot of these areas are pretty close to sea level. Of course, we know New Orleans is actually below sea level. So this is certainly a huge threat. So in terms of it's actual, to answer Rachel's question from the beginning, it does not look like there will be direct impact. That's not to say you cannot get some of that cloud cover, but it looks like high pressure should be in charge. The one thing you will feel, though, Rachel, in the coming days in southern Ontario and Quebec, is the humidity. That is going up. So it's going to feel tropical, although thankfully we won't get tropical storm conditions.
Absolutely. Chris, that was a great explanation. Thanks so much for joining us on the live stream. Chris Murphy is in our national headquarters in Oakville, Ontario. That's where we are as well. Mark Robinson is joining us from Perry. He is down in Florida, and we're going to keep you covered as we go throughout the next hour, focusing on Idalia as it continues to wrap its intense power around the state of Florida within the Big Bend region. I say the word intense power, and then we cut to this shot of Mark. This is live. This is happening right now in Perry, Florida. Mark, essentially that eye of the storm is just to the south of you. You are experiencing some of the worst weather right now that this hurricane has to offer. I know Mark probably can't even hear me.
We're gonna move.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, look at those winds.
Look at this.
Yeah, Rachel, it's really hard to hear you. Sorry, but I could hear like the debris flying, and I just the wind. So as soon as I hear a bang, I'm back into shelter. I did want to show you and get a chance to experience how strong that wind was. And it is painful. It is like little needles sticking into the side of my face. And this is very typical of these very, very strong winds. I'm going to try and take a wind sample. You can see my friend Tim Millar over here. As he's taking wind samples, we'll be able to sort of get a chance to get some information from him in a little bit. But definitely, oh my God. Jeez. Okay. Holy jeez, sorry. Rachel, sorry about that. It's actually a bit hard to stand up. I wasn't expecting to get knocked off my feet like that. But yeah, jeez. Yeah, that was the garbage can. And yeah, I'm gonna step back in here a bit. Yeah, Dave's getting hit hard. We're gonna have to move the car.
Yeah, we gotta move the car.
Yeah, we're gonna have to move through, Rachel, so you're gonna have to give us a minute or two because we're really getting hit hard here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a bit speechless.
Yeah, me too.
That was an incredible experience, a very scary experience. And, you know, that showcases exactly why people have been urged to evacuate. You cannot stay in a place like this where there's debris flying like this, the power is out, you have no way of communicating, you can't escape, you can't travel. Storm surge, it's not likely to hit an area like Perry as it's a little further inland, but flooding rains are quite possible. I couldn't imagine being on a place around the coast with the storm surge coming and then experiencing the winds like that. I have worked at the Weather Network for 12 years. I have never been with someone live in the field that has had weather that intense.
Yeah, and he's dodging debris. He's doing such a good job at making sure that he's safe. But with that change of wind direction, it's very, very difficult to do so, because really where Mark was, where he is right now in Perry, they're getting wind directions all over the place because he is in that northern section of the eye wall, right where you see Perry there, those oranges and yellows. That is the intense rain. That is the most intense thunderstorm of this entire system, because that's where the most energy is coming from, is that eye wall. So if you asked me, Rachel, where do you not want to be? I would probably go somewhere right here, exactly where Mark is. He is a professional. He is going to be moving himself and getting situated in a better location. But it's interesting to see how he started, the conditions that he started with. He was like, oh, okay, like I'm starting to see the trees blow, and then how it's rapidly developed, rapidly changed. Now the wind directions are coming all over the place. He's getting pelted in the face with the rain. I mean, it's incredible to see how fast the conditions can change with a storm like this.
For sure, and that was a key message yesterday from Ron DeSantis when he told people you need to evacuate Florida. He really said one word: just leave, just get out. Some of the images that we've been seeing come into our newsroom are really, really quite compelling as we look at the storm surge and we see this whipping wind. This was Perry, Florida, just about 3 hours ago. You can see how the conditions have dramatically deteriorated. And even 3 hours ago, it was quite a scary scene with that generator blowing into the distance. Now, it does look like a place like Madison is going to experience that really heavy band of rainfall that is moving just north of Perry. So we see what it was looking like behind Mark. We are going to see that continue to push further to the north. You know, travel along Highway 10, I would say it's an absolute no-go. Travel anywhere around this region is extremely discouraged at this point. Mark is a trained professional. He has done multiple hurricanes before, so we do trust his judgment being out there. But this is really the worst of the weather that this storm is bringing right now at this moment.
And I was just getting a word from our meteorologist behind the scenes that the station in and around Perry is still reporting, so it's not down, which is something that we were expecting to see, some of these radars not being able to report. It's still reporting, and wind gusts of 130 kilometers per hour were reported. So it's no surprise that Mark is out there battling the wind gusts. With winds like that, I'm sure the rain is really hurting, pelting on his face. And just taking a look at how much rain is estimated from this radar site, we're inching close to about 100 millimeters. And that's just the rain that's falling, not including the rain or the water that's being pushed in with the storm surge.
Absolutely. Now, this is just an estimate too over the past 2 hours or so, right? So when we look at 75 millimeters of rain, that's a huge rain to fall in one whole day or one weekend, let's say. So to get that within just this morning, we know that we are going to be looking at localized flooding throughout this area for sure. Now, is the satellite up yet?
It looks like the satellite is starting to show, and you can start to see these little bubbling features. I'm going to put my pen on here, right where Mark is, and that is our cloud tops overshooting our atmosphere. So it's bubbling up. That's showing me that it's actually intensifying. It's not dissipating yet. When we get that upward motion, that means that we're still getting ample energy, and the thunderstorms are growing, even though the hurricane itself might be diminishing.
And when we talk about this storm, you know, having a Category 3 hurricane make landfall in this region, many people did evacuate, which was the right decision, but they've moved into places like Georgia or maybe South Carolina. This storm is coming. We've seen such a change in the position of this storm since we started the live stream. It is moving relatively quick.
Yeah, it is. It is making its way really into Georgia now. Those outer bands are starting to to push in. So we're going to be expecting to see more rainfall. The gustiest winds still yet to come, but really the remnants of the eye wall in through Perry and where Mark is, it's starting to make its way towards the northern border of Florida, so the Florida and Georgia border. So Georgia is going to be in for really everything that Mark just showed you, especially with this band that he was in, this heaviest one, continuing to move towards the north and northeasterly direction. So along the Highway 10, Highway 45, and that's just in the coming moments, not even in the coming hours.
Absolutely. You know, in Tallahassee, their National Weather Service, or I shouldn't say their the National Weather Service office in Tallahassee, they said yesterday that this is going to be such an unprecedented event because they've never seen a hurricane move into the bay and then strengthen and make landfall as a major hurricane right through that Big Bend region. So we are watching this unprecedented event happen right before our eyes. We watch that eye wall come right on shore, and you can see that the flooding and the rainfall, this is going to be a long-term story over the day-to-day and then into Georgia. If you could give an estimate as to when the Carolinas would see some of this most intense weather, do you think that we would have that estimate yet?
Yeah, I think we could if we look at the track of this. Now, this is going to show really where that center is, where you see the 2 and so on. It looks like as we get through this afternoon, the heart of it, where that 2 is, it's an estimate. Remember, the storm could be sheared, but will make its way into Georgia. And then the Carolinas, we're looking at maybe an overnight threat into very early Thursday. So luckily, that's not really a time where a lot of folks are going to be out and about. So hopefully that you can stay inside or begin to move north away from the shoreline and not have to maybe travel into work. I'm hoping all the works and businesses will be closed by that time because when I was looking at the rain, we're expecting to see anywhere from 100, maybe 200 millimeters of rain. So that is substantial. And like you mentioned, falling over a very short period of time.
Absolutely. Now, Rachel, as we look at this track, we see Idalia right now as a Category 3. This model's showing us that it's going to be downgraded to a 2. And when a hurricane becomes downgraded, it all has to do with the wind speeds.
It does. We're going to be seeing the core winds really diminish from what we saw it make landfall with, which was Category 3, and that is around 200 kilometers per hour. But as it makes its way into more of a tropical storm, we're looking at the max wind speeds of around 100 kilometers per hour. So much more manageable. However, still going to be seeing impacts in terms of storm surge, in terms of heavy rainfall, localized flooding, especially if it falls on an urban area, you know, with the concrete and all the asphalt, the ground can't soak up all of this moisture. So instead it will be ponding and pooling and really accumulating in a very short period of time. So that's the biggest worry I have for Georgia and the Carolinas. But also, you don't really need much wind to get power outages. We saw our power outage numbers really climb in the
over
past
200,000
moments.
now.
And that's going to continue to really rapidly change. So I would heed the weather that you see now may not be the weather that you see in a couple of hours or even overnight. Just hunker down until this storm makes its way safely over into the Atlantic Ocean, probably by Thursday afternoon.
And we saw just how quickly the situation changed behind Mark Robinson and the messaging from Florida saying that these water levels are rising so quickly and so fast along the coast. Now, Rachel, I want to take just a quick pause as we're talking about Idalia to just focus on Franklin for a little bit as well, because Franklin is another hurricane that's swirling in the Atlantic, and this is going to have an impact on Atlantic Canada. We're not talking landfall, but of course some rainfall.
Yeah, well, you think it's just offshore, so we're not going to be seeing any impacts, but we do see a trough making its way across Atlantic Canada right now, and it's actually pulling in some of that tropical moisture. So heavy periods of rainfall throughout today.
All right, we're going to take things back into Florida. Mark Robinson has repositioned himself into a bit of a safer spot right now as the winds have just been so incredibly dramatic. Mark, some of the wind readings in Perry, Florida are 130 kilometers an hour. Their weather station still has power and they are still reporting, but 130K, this is very damaging winds, and of course you've been experiencing it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We keep having to reposition, and the reason I'm this way is you see me around the side of the bank and just hitting that front lens. We repositioned the car, but we'll probably have to do it again and turn the car around so that you know that the rain doesn't instantly coat the lens. Look behind me, and I'm going to walk over this way just a little bit. So Dave, if you just sort of follow me, I hope you can still see me. Right back here, you know, you can see the winds beginning to sort of push this way. Some of the trees have come down, lots of shred. The one thing that we're finally beginning to see, unfortunately, is damage, like actual, you know, infrastructure damage. We're starting to see pieces and chunks of roofs coming off, which is why I'm sort of positioned in here just to be that a little bit safer. I'm going to walk a little bit out here just while we've got a little bit of a lull. So Dave, I'm going to turn if you, I know that I'm making it really hard on Dave here, so, so he's going to try and get around to me. You know, again, I'm going to apologize. But I want to sort of step out here, and you can see, you know, there's the chunks of roof that have come off over here. I actually had to jump over a garbage can as it went flying in that direction. And here we go, another big burst. And I'm going to step back in a little bit so that you know, I'm not out in that debris stream. Now, we definitely have seen a bit of a ramping down in the winds, much more variable. So we're getting gusts and then nothing and then gusts. And that is sort of what you expect as the hurricane begins to move on land. You get a bit of a breakdown of those laminar winds, those very, very smooth winds. And then you start to get that increasing gusts. Yeah, I think we're probably going to have to sort of turn everything around just so that we don't have, you know, we're not going to have everything in the car soaked and the camera's damaged by water. So I'm going to send it back inside to you, Rachel, while we do a little bit of repositioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, this is a big update coming in right now. Hurricane Idalia officially downgraded to a Category 2 storm. So Rachel, we knew that this was going to happen. As this hurricane loses its fuel, it loses its energy source, essentially being over the very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and it moves its way onto land. It's losing a bit of its structure and strength, but not to say this doesn't have a massive impact still, because it absolutely has a lot more damage to go.
Yeah, it may not be a major hurricane anymore, but those winds are going to continue to bring damage, widespread power outages. We're going to continue to see that throughout today, and also into other states as well. Other states are really going to be seeing the first bit of Idalia in the coming moments, and that is Georgia up next and then the Carolinas. But we're going to still anticipate to see gusts well over 100 kilometers per hour. And like Mark was showing, all of the roof damage. Now, it wasn't initial, but over time, as those winds continue to ramp up and change direction, it's very hard for roofs and shingles and infrastructure to continue to hold on.
Yeah.
So for that extensive period of time and that intense like we're seeing. But it does look like Mark situated himself in the worst of the worst. So hopefully it will be a little bit calmer, as much as you can be calm in a hurricane, for the rest of us through today.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think it is good to put it into perspective to show people that Mark is experiencing the worst of this. I don't want to paint the picture that all of the state of Florida and Georgia are getting into this incredibly intense weather, but we certainly have seen a lot of power and a lot of energy as this hurricane comes through. If you're just tuning in right now on the Weather Network, on our channel, or on the live stream, we were joining you at 7:45 a.m. when Idalia officially made landfall as a major Category 3 hurricane in the Big Bend region of Florida. Now this storm officially has been downgraded to a Category 2 hurricane, but still a lot of strength with this storm. Tornadoes are another element that we're watching. It's really storm surge, tornadoes, of course, the localized flooding, the damaging winds. There's so much to talk about, but let's quickly get into the tornado potential.
Yeah, well, we have tornado watches in place from Tampa and Palm Bay all the way up to Jacksonville and into Savannah. What that means is that we have the conditions, we have the ingredients in our atmosphere to produce tornadoes. So throughout this afternoon and evening, as the sun rises, we will be seeing extra energy and warmer air as the air temperature warms up on the ground. That provides energy to the thunderstorm. So although the hurricane is out of its energy source, the thunderstorms will be getting a little bit of an extra oomph throughout this afternoon. So tornadoes also on the table, not only a hurricane.
All right, we're going to take things out to Nathan Coleman now, because we're not just tracking Idalia, we're also tracking Franklin. Now, Nate, looks like you're at Point Pleasant Park. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the background, right?
Yes, that's a good eye, Rachel. I've relocated here to Point Pleasant Park, just along the coast here, still in downtown Halifax. But we've been, getting the rain trickling down here, but we've seen some heavy thunderstorms passing to our south. So we're getting a bit lucky here in Halifax, missing that, and to our north. So in the Annapolis Valley, some places have seen 40 to 50 millimeters already, 73 millimeters recorded in Muskegon, which is in Digby County. So just because it hasn't been downpouring here in Halifax, it's been happening all around us, and that shows you how fickle some of these thunderstorms can be. If they track right over you, it's the difference between 10 millimeters and 50. So you want to be on guard, because that threat continues throughout the day here in the HRM.
All right, Nate, now let's just put it into perspective how wet this summer has been across Nova Scotia. We are now, of course, getting into hurricane season, when likely the Maritimes can see its biggest impact. But we look at some of the numbers. In Halifax, we saw over 200 millimeters of rain in June, 187 in July, close to 200 in August. Hurricane season and the moisture it could bring, it could be a bit overwhelming for Nova Scotia.
Yes, those are numbers, each month over 100 millimeters more than what we're used to now. In the peak of hurricane season, we can see a big cane come and hit, and then that gives us those totals. But we've already had those because of the thunderstorms, the tropical moisture that they were drawing in. So it is quite unusual. Everything is saturated here. And earlier, talking to Chris Murphy, when he was out during Dorian, it was a similar setup, that everything was wet. So when the wind hit, the trees just toppled over. So certainly we feel lucky that Franklin's so far offshore, it's not getting super windy here in Halifax, because it wouldn't take much to knock the trees over. So certainly Nova Scotia Power has been going around doing their tree trimming. They're spending more than ever on tree trimming. The budget is up to $40 million for next year because of this issue. They don't want those branches falling on the lines.
Awesome job, Nathan Coleman. Thank you so much for joining us from Halifax. And I'm sure many people in Nova Scotia and right across Atlantic Canada are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, as this huge area of high pressure essentially pushed Franklin way offshore. So yes, it's bringing rainfall. We could see localized flooding within Atlantic Canada, but this isn't going to be the huge impact that we've seen with previous storms like Ian that Nate was just talking about.
Yeah, and like he was mentioning, we've seen almost 200% of our normal rainfall for the summer. So any rainfall that we're forecasting for Atlantic Canada, we're just on a little bit more of a high alert with the flooding situation.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to go back now into Florida, where we're joining our storm hunter, Mark Robinson. Mark, the sky definitely looks a bit brighter behind you, but those winds are still whipping, and you can see so much debris in the background behind you.
Yeah, you know what? It's a big change. You'll notice I'm sort of standing here just fine. I'm actually on the opposite side. When we were talking earlier, we were actually looking in that direction, like literally 180 degrees in the other direction. So now I'm standing on the backside of the bank building, and you can see, a little bit of the trees, etc. Behind me. The wind has really come down. Now, that doesn't mean that it's over. We're not going to see those screaming winds again. We've got very little cell signal, so I'm just so happy I'm able to talk to you, because I can't get anything through for my cell. But I'm just very happy and pleased that I can document this and go through this with you. But yeah, big change in the last couple of minutes. Like literally, we switched the car around, and then we almost got into a little bit of a lull. So when I look around, I see a few trees down, a few roofs off, a little bit of roof damage here and there. I'm pleased so far at the lack of significant, really bad damage here in Perry, and this is probably one of the harder hit areas just because of where we were, and we saw those winds earlier, just unbelievable bursts. So what we may see from here on is a slow coming down of the wind. We may see those gusts come up again, so those may happen still. Very variable storm, but we may just, as I said, that storm moving onshore, the core of the hurricane moving onshore. Once it moves onshore, it loses the access to the energy of the oceans, and you encounter a little bit of friction, and that's you get the breaking down, the slowing down. To say that it isn't still dangerous. Trees coming down, especially when you're talking about very saturated soil. I was talking to some of the locals in this area, and they were saying, yes, these are, the soil's very saturated. They're concerned that they're going to have trees coming down. That is still ongoing as this begins to push up towards Georgia, and we are going to see flooding, rains as well. There's a lot of moisture packed into this system. But, as you were talking, I heard you talking to Nate Coleman up there. Nate, I'm not sending this one towards you. This one's going to go offshore. Some of the models, actually, and I'm a little bit wary of saying this, but it does have the hurricane looping back around and hitting Florida one more time. Big difference. If it does do that, it won't be very strong because there's a lot of wind shear out there. Wind shear, as we know, the enemy of hurricanes. So we're not talking about a really strong storm. It may also fall apart. It may just go out to sea. That is in the future. Right now, the president here in Perry, I'm actually seeing some police and emergency vehicles moving around now. A few other cars moving around. So yeah, we're definitely there. Emergency services likely are going to check on people to make sure that people are safe. There's likely a lot of people in and around this town. This was not evacuated. There may have been evacuations here, but it wasn't because of storm surge. We weren't really worried about storm surge in this area. This was all about the winds and the rain. And there's one of those gusts. So actually step back in a little bit. I can see some debris sort of flying over. I keep saying it's over there where you can't see it, but there is some debris still in the air in and around Perry. Rachel?
Yeah, you can see that tree behind you, Mark. It is just almost sideways, almost parallel with the ground at this point, trying to sustain some of those winds. So as Mark was highlighting there, the wind is going to be the biggest damage component, the largest threat. Of course, we could see some localized flooding as well. The lightning strikes obviously are dangerous. But as we look back more towards the coast of Florida, that Big Bend region, it is the storm surge. And this is some of the latest messaging here from the National Hurricane Center. The 9 a.m. update saying catastrophic storm surge is occurring along the coast of Florida in Big Bend. The damaging winds are spreading inland over northern Florida. We've easily seen a lot of these wind gusts close to about 200 kilometers an hour. So a very dangerous situation as this hurricane continues to weaken, but still provide a lot of impact now that it is over land, and it's really being felt by the human population now. And now we have a lot of stories that are starting to come out of this storm.
A lot of stories and a lot of power outages. Like Mark was mentioning, he had to really endure the worst of the worst. Have a look at this clip. He mentioned that he jumped over a garbage can, and I just really need to see it. There it is. Wow. He's got style.
Yeah, that was quick. And this is all while talking on a live stream, right? It's not like you can just focus on what's happening around you. You are talking to thousands of people as you're trying to communicate this weather story. Where Mark positioned himself really was the most intense weather that we saw as Idalia, as a Category 3 hurricane, made landfall. Since that time, we have seen Idalia become downgraded to a Category 2 storm. Still a lot of strength with it. The potential for hurricanes is there. The storm surge, catastrophic. That is what the National Hurricane Center is calling it, catastrophic, along that Big Bend region. So we have seen a lot of change over the last 2 hours since we started this live stream. Change, I guess, the weakening is good news, but now this is where the human impact starts to come into play. So I want to send things over to Chris Murphy. And Chris, we saw this storm make landfall. Now it is officially downgraded to a Category 2 hurricane.
Yeah, and as it moves further away and it's lost its main source of fuel, that being the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it will continue to weaken. But there's still a host of threats out there. So, I mean, it's still a Category 2. It's weakened to a Category 2. I think that should tell you a lot. So we got the tornado and the thunderstorm risk all through central areas of Florida this morning, right up to southeastern Georgia, not to mention the heavy rain. You still got the storm surge concerns to deal with as well, and we still have those storm surge warnings. And by storm surge, of course, we mean the abnormal rise of seawater levels being pushed ashore by those strong winds. Atmospheric pressure to a degree, but mostly it is the wind. That means inundation further inland. And speaking of inundation, we've been seeing Mark Robinson get hit by
I've never seen anything like that, and I'm not just
rain. But Mark, I think you have positioned yourself perfectly. You are not directly in the most harmful area, but you certainly can. What we've been seeing tells quite a story.
Yeah, no, Chris, I mean, we've been what looks to be possibly the peak of the hurricane a little while ago here in Perry, Florida. And that is, you get very dramatic shots. The wind is screaming, debris is flying. What you don't see is the human impacts, and that's what we begin to see now. Though one of the big differences from being down on the coast versus here is we're dealing with wind damage. So we talk about power outages, roof shingles coming off. If the winds are strong enough, we do see building and structural collapse. So far as we've seen, and keep in mind, Chris, you're just getting a very small sliver of this vast story from me. But from what I can see, this town seems to be holding together fairly well. I've seen a few pieces of shingle off, a few pieces of debris, of course, flying around. But this town itself seems relatively intact, which is actually, I think a good news story for here. What we don't know yet, and what I don't know yet, and I can't tell you yet, is how the coastal areas have fared. How bad is it down on the coast? How bad was that storm surge that came in? We're talking before, before the hurricane, 11 to 15 to 16 feet. That came in. Now, how bad is it down there? That is the real destructive things. We saw the same thing in Ian, where we were in Punta Gorda, again, dealing with the wind. The surge went into Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach. And we didn't know until after the hurricane how bad it was down there, right on the coast. And that's what we're going to try and find out in the next little while as this begins to be a little bit safer to move around, is how have people been impacted by this hurricane? I hope it's minimal. I hope that the small amount of damage that we see, like around right where I am right here, is the same story everywhere. But unfortunately, I anticipate with that surge coming in, that won't be the story for every part of where this hurricane came on shore near the Big Bend area. Chris?
Now, Mark, cleanup from this, whether it's tornado damage, storm surge damage, just flooding rains, this is not something that people's lives go back to quickly after we've moved on to something else. When we talk about cleanup, are we talking weeks? Are we talking months? Or are we talking beyond that? Oh, we've lost Mark. Okay, I'll ask him that question when we get a chance. So Rachel, we'll send it back to you. Again, this storm, although weakening, still provides plenty of threats in its path.
Now, I want to talk about the fact that this is an I-named storm. We're talking about Idalia. We can think back to Ian or Irma and all of these intense I names. Rachel, what is it about the letter I?
Yeah, people think like ice storms are monsters, and statistically speaking, you wouldn't be wrong. Yeah. Because when we look at all of the names of retired storms, I is the top of the charts with 13.
Interesting.
So what is it about I? Well, it just coincides with our near peak hurricane season around August and into September, late August into September.
And you know what? I just want to just remind the audience, the hurricane names go by the alphabet.
Exactly.
So we're not just throwing out random names. It goes by the alphabet, starts at A, goes to I. So the way I is positioned, I guess, in the alphabet, right?
Yeah, the way it's positioned being the 9th named storm, it often coincides with when we see that peak hurricane season, and that coincides with when we see the warmest ocean waters as well. So it's just fate that the I named storms are often major hurricanes, and just to name a few, here are some. And if you're from Atlantic Canada, I'm sure you know Igor all too well, and also Ian was recently retired as well.
For sure. That's an interesting little tidbit. You know, as you talk with family and friends about this storm, I know with my family and my Weather Network group of friends, we're always talking about these interesting weather stories and, you know, a different way to tell it, a different way to make it memorable for someone. And, you know, I've just been reading our YouTube comments as well. Mark's red rain suit has been extremely memorable for this audience. There's been a lot of comments on that one. And, you know, it may look funny and you may think, okay, is this guy overdoing it with the helmet and the rain suit? He's not.
No, he's really not.
He's honestly not. This is what you would need in order to keep relatively safe in a storm of this size and with this power.
Maybe at the beginning of the stream, I was like questioning it because, you know, it was like clearer skies and maybe a breeze here and there. But I'm glad he was prepared with all of that because, as you can see, the conditions rapidly changed. Idalia is still going to be bringing impacts throughout today, even into tomorrow, so the next 24 hours. So, hey, better be over-prepared than under-prepared.
Now, speaking of being prepared, quite often when we see a big, powerful storm like this in Florida, people in Canada, Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces start to think, could this have an impact in my backyard? So, Rachel, let's take us through this. Could we see remnants from Idalia in Canada?
Yeah, it's not out of the question because it's something that we often see. I believe we saw remnants of Sandy in Ontario and Toronto. That brought some very flooding rains. So Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, if you are wondering about it, it does look like models are not really agreeing a lot, but there is model indication that this will be pushed towards the east. And what we have to thank is really a resurgence of summer. Ontario and parts of Quebec have not seen 30 degrees in all of August, almost being robbed of our summer, if you can think about that. But high pressure is going to be coming back in place. That's going to be steering both of these storms towards the Atlantic Ocean, out of our way, and bringing back 30 degrees and sunshine.
That certainly is some good news. And a very similar setup happened with Franklin as well. We've been chatting with Nathan Coleman in Halifax. Nathan Coleman has been showing us some of the moisture that has been associated with Franklin, but we're not looking at a major impact because of this area of high pressure sort of acting like defense, pushing these storms off the coast, keeping them out into the Atlantic. So Canada experiencing some of the better side of the storm when it comes to these better weather stories, that's for sure. All right, what are we looking at here? Some rainfall in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. This was happening this morning. So this is Franklin. This is some of the moisture, the tropical moisture from Franklin moving into Atlantic Canada. And we were chatting earlier with Nathan. The rainfall has been just so horrible in Atlantic Canada when we talk about this summer and the flooding. So thankfully, Franklin not making as massive of an impact as it could. All right, we're going to check in with Mark Robinson for one last time on this live stream. Mark, the winds continue to whip around you. And if you can hear me, I just want to let you know a lot of people in the YouTube comments saying that they like your red rain suit.
Well, I'm glad they like my red rain suit. It's actually a dry suit. I use it for kayaking, and I can tell you it's relatively warm, and usually in Florida it's just too hot to wear. But this hurricane, because it's mixing down a lot of the colder air, it's been absolutely perfect. I actually have on a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm completely dry underneath this thing. It's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, this hurricane definitely has been the story of variability. You know, it started off where we had, these gusty winds, got into that eye wall. It started to really hammer us. But even then, it wasn't like Ian. Ian had this constant roar of wind, just kept going and going and going. This one, it hit. There was like all of a sudden a really strong gust, and then it would go to almost a lull. And now that that's all passed, looking around, we're into a lull. It does, the winds get up a little bit, but this is the peak of it has passed, and it's beginning to move fairly far onshore. But keep in mind, still a very dangerous storm, no matter where you are in the path of this. be prepared, and just, I hope you're safe. I just want to make sure that everybody in the path of this storm is going to be safe.
In Florida, the storm surge over 6 feet. It's already a devastating situation. So Mark Robinson, thank you so much for joining us this morning from Perry in Florida. You put yourself in the perfect situation to showcase how intense this storm could be. And Nathan Coleman, thank you so much as well for joining us from the Halifax region, showcasing some of the moisture and the potential today for those thunderstorms across Nova Scotia as some of that tropical influence starts to make its way into Canada. I just want to remind our audience that our coverage when it comes to Idalia and Franklin will continue here on the Weather Network all day long today. You can also check us out online at theweathernetwork.com. Our writers are working tirelessly to update all of our articles and bring you some of the best images. And of course, if you were watching the live stream and you saw Mark Robinson dodge that garbage can, that video is likely going to be #1 on our app today. So if you want to watch that again 5 times today, you can do that too. Of course, we want everyone to stay safe and know the strength of this storm and really the unprecedented event that took place this morning as this major Category 3 hurricane made landfall in the Big Bend region of Florida. All right, thank you for joining us. And of course, the Weather Network is your best source as we continue to track this 2023 Atlantic hurricane season.
Heather, as you've been talking about, making landfall 7:45 approximately this morning Eastern time, just in the Big Bend area. Our storm.